Chapter 1260. She asked curiously, since killing at the border is the same, why doesn't this person just sneak into our palace and start a massacre? Isn't it quite good at disturbing the morale of the army? The old Dragon King didn't know whether to laugh or cry at her naive thoughts. He sighed and said, after reaching the celestial state, it's easy for experts to sense each other. Even if he can kill 1 or 2 cities, even if the entire Aquarius state bleeds for thousands of miles, then what? Would he be besieged and killed by masters like Tuoba, Hong Jingyan and Jian Shenjin? Princess Hongyan curled her lips and said, why are you still so restrained after becoming an invincible expert? How boring. In the past, I've only heard that the half-saints of the celestial state of Confucianism, Buddhism and Taoism didn't dare to kill easily because they were afraid of being tainted by karma. It turns out that these pure martial artists aren't much better. The old man's face was bitter and he said some words of conscience. I have no choice but to wait for death here with you, princess. Isn't that even more boring? The old man looked at the sky for no reason and sighed, between the heavens and the earth, with the heavens and the earth, who isn't a puppet with their hands and feet tied? There are people who are lucky enough to jump out of this cage, but there's definitely no one who can break it. Princess Hongyan was surprised. It's over? The thunder is loud but the rain is too light. I haven't had enough fun watching it. While they were talking, the knight of Beimang didn't disappoint this noble surnamed Yelu. When the less than 300 riders all stopped their horses, that person also stopped his blade. A famous archer in the Lu battalion seized this perfect opportunity to draw his bow into a full moon. The bowstring released a loud bang and shot an arrow at the young swordsman. The other 2 burly knights with big bows on their backs followed suit. They didn't need to deliberately prepare their arrows. Instead, they drew their bows and shot out an arrow in one go. 3 sharp arrows pierced through the air, the arrowheads all aimed accurately at the swordsman's face. What happened next left these seasoned elites flabbergasted. The 3 arrows hovered quietly in the air, maintaining their slanting postures. The saberman sheathed the cold saber that the Beimang border army hated the most. 1 eagle feather arrow and 2 ordinary feather arrows. He reached out to grab the eagle plume arrow, which was known in the Central Plains as faster than a hawk and unable to be shaken by a strong wind, and threw it out with a backhand. The archer, who had subconsciously grabbed the reins after shooting the arrow, had his head pierced through by the arrow. His entire body was pulled back by the huge force. His hands pulled the reins and the warhorse raised its front hooves. The knight's corpse fell off the horse. The warhorse that had been with the dead knight day and night still seemed to be in a daze. It stepped lightly on its fine hooves, turned around, and used its nose to touch its master who had fallen to the ground. A black fox that looked like a leader turned around and looked at the northern sky with great nostalgia. After turning his head again, he faced the young expert with terrifying strength. This Lanzi suddenly squeezed his horse's belly and took the lead in a crazy charge that was tantamount to suicide. The second warhorse began to follow, then the third, the fourth. In the end, none of the riders in the entire cavalry turned around and retreated. All of them began to charge. Seeing this tragic scene, Princess Hongyan bit her lip and said softly, "Let's go." The old man was puzzled, but he did not hesitate. He grabbed her shoulder and retreated. She closed her eyes and felt the strong wind blow past her ears. She said, "If we allow the news of them dying here for no reason to spread back to the grasslands, then their deaths will be in vain." The old Dragon King did not say anything. Nearly 400 riders had chased down 14 riders, but they had not succeeded. If they allowed the enemy crossbowmen to send back information, even if these Beimang warriors had all died in battle, their parents, wives, children, and even their entire tribes on the grasslands would be implicated. And these people were originally waiting for their families to return home with military merits and food. Even if they returned empty-handed, it was good that they were alive. After allowing the 2 big fish to leave, Su Fengyin helped the 14 crossbowmen cover the retreat. He hung the cold saber at his waist and faced the aggressive Beimang cavalry. He began to run. The leader of the Black Fox fence was the first to reach him. Su Fengyin jumped up. The leader was still in the posture of raising his arm and slashing his saber. He slapped the man's head with his palm. Both the man and his horse were smashed into the yellow sand. The warhorse's abdomen was stuck to the sand pit. However, Su Fengyin had a head in his hand. He pulled it out and threw it at the second Black Fox fence. The fence's chest was blown apart. Su Fengyin quickly fell to the ground. With a shake, his shoulders hit the sides of the warhorses on both sides. The horse's hooves left the ground, and the 2 riders fell to the side. One of the riders charged forward fiercely. However, when it was about 10 feet away from Su Fengyin, The rider and the horse were crushed by the majestic chi, bursting into a cloud of bloody mist. The spiderweb spy hidden between the Black Fox fence and the elite Lu cavalry broke through the bloody mist without warning. The tip of his sword pointed directly at Su Fengyan's forehead. Su Fengyan completely ignored the tip of the sword. He stretched out his hand and pressed down on the head of the spy. Then he slammed the spy to the ground. The tip of the sword shattered and the blade snapped. The spy's body bounced on the yellow sand. First, blood flowed out of his 7 orifices. Then, his meridians were broken and blood seeped out of his entire body. This corpse was kicked up by Su Fengyan and slammed into a warhorse in front of him. After the dozen or so riders at the front died without any resistance, the surviving riders finally lost the courage to charge to their deaths. Some people began to retreat. There were hot-blooded people in the world who were not afraid of death. There were also people who were afraid of death but could calmly die for it. However, these brave and skilled Beimang elites did not wish to die at the hands of an enemy whose name and identity they did not even know. Su Fengyan stamped his foot slightly and stretched out a hand. On the ground in front of him, yellow sand swords rose from the ground. After about half an incense stick's worth of time, the old man in embroidered clothes, who had brought Princess Hongyan and dashed for more than 20 li, straightened his back in an instant. A cold voice rang out from behind him. "The two of you are old acquaintances I met at Tumbling Horse Pass. Do you not value your lives at all?" Then Princess Hongyan realized that her buttocks were lightly padded. The person behind her smiled and said, "The old debt is settled. So you can die now." Chapter 1261. There are still 2 chapters left, but it's definitely late, especially the 3rd chapter. Every dog has its day. At the Tumbling Horse Pass, the old Dragon King escorted the woman with a mink headscarf into the dangerous northern Liang border pass. She saw the young man with a pair of beautiful eyes and thought that he was just a disciple of an aristocratic family who knew a little about martial arts. She wanted to tease him, so she did as she pleased and touched his buttocks. Who would have thought that the tables would turn so quickly? Today, after he patted her buttocks, the princess, the only descendant of the royal family who could make the Empress of Beimang willing to play with her grandson, did not even have the courage to turn around. The old man in embroidered clothes was indeed the ancestor of Beimang's spider web. He gently pushed Princess Hongyan's shoulder and pushed her far away. Her life was hanging by a thread, so she did not care about controlling her strength and fell into the yellow sand more than 10 feet away. After sending her out of danger temporarily, the old Dragon King let out a light shout. His voice was like spring thunder, and his chi flowed like a flood. Thousands of tiny cracks appeared on his luxurious brocade clothes that were not inferior to those made in Jiangnan. The old Dragon King did not turn around. He did not even turn his head. He raised his arm and smashed backward. The sleeves on his arm instantly turned into fine powder. Dragon King Hulu Chieguan was an expert who had been famous in northern Mang for a long time. Before Tuoba Bodhisattva, Murong Baoding Hong Jingyan, and the other new talents had risen to prominence, the heaven-warping Hulu Chieguan was once viewed as a peak expert who could block spear Immortal Wang Xiu's spear with his bare hands. Hulu Chieguan's close-quarters combat skills couldn't be said to be weak, especially his tenacious muscles and bones. Before Murong Baoding obtained the great reputation of immovable wisdom king, he had even asked Hulu Chieguan for guidance on body-tempering secret techniques. When the Empress of Beimang was purging the Jianghu forces, Hulu Chieguan, who was summoned, showed off his skills. 8 siege chariots with 200 strong men each threw 8 stones weighing 180 pounds at the same time towards the Dragon King Hulu Chieguan, who was standing 2,000 feet away. The old man smashed the stones with his fist in the air and did not let any of the stones fall to the ground. The old but vigorous Hulu Taiguan's arms swung out like wind and thunder. Su Fengyan stretched out his right hand and casually grabbed the old Dragon King's wrist. He snapped his fingers and broke Changxing. Hulu Chieguan instantly felt that the rapidly flowing qi in his body was cut off, like a fast ship suddenly encountering a chain across the river. Moreover, this chain was not only in one place but in 6 important acupoints of his body, as if it had forcibly set up 6 barriers in his body. Even if you are a fine horse that can travel 1,000 li in a day, under the heavy snow, you will not be able to move forward. Hulu Taiguan was trembling all over. Blood spurted out from the gaps between his teeth. Even if he was injured, he still wanted to break through those iron chains. He tried his best to connect all the meridians in his body. The old Dragon King was very decisive and ruthless. However, since Su Fengyan had made a move, he would not hesitate. He raised his left hand like a knife and placed it on Hulu Taiguan's shoulder and ear. Then he slapped his left hand and grabbed the old man's wrist. Hulu Taiguan's head was violently shaken. What was even more shocking was that the old man's entire arm was pulled out from his body by Su Fengnian. At the same time, the right side of Hulu Taiguan's head was densely covered in bright red threads. They were like countless red snakes wantonly swimming in his skin. Hulu Taiguan's strong points were his extraordinary strength, dragon tendons and iron bones. He was incomparably proficient in close combat. However, he definitely did not know that if he let Su Fengnian get close to him and tremble, it would be tantamount to letting the Liang dynasty's Han Wudi, who was known as the Land Immortal, get close to him. And the only person in the world who was proficient in killing celestial state experts, Han Xingxian, should be able to kill a finger celestial state expert. Hulu Taiguan, whose arm had been torn off, had his feet deeply sunk into the sand. His eyes were wide open as he stared into the distance, not moving at all. Su Fengnian gently let go of the arm and turned around to look at the insufferably arrogant woman with the marten forehead. This sorrowful Princess Hongyan was sitting on the ground in a daze. She did not know why the old Dragon King, who was rarely matched in her mind, was motionless. She only knew that the old man was definitely seriously injured. She would never have thought that the legendary figure of Beimang Hulu Taiguan had already breathed his last. Su Fengnian looked at this woman who had probably forgotten to run away. Neither of them spoke. She suddenly shouted in a stern voice, "Old Dragon King, kill him. He's the king of Beiliang, Su Fengnian. As long as you kill him, I'll personally go to His Majesty and ask for your reward. You can be a great general and be the prefect of discipline." Princess Hongyan was not stupid. On the contrary, she was an extremely intelligent and shrewd woman. Otherwise, she would not have been able to deal with the two surnames, Yelu and Murong. She cried out, "Hulu Taiguan, why don't you make a move?" With a face full of tears, she choked out, "Old Dragon King, at least move a little bit." Su Fengnian looked at this woman's marten forehead, but his left hand was already on the cold saber at his waist. Princess Hongyan suddenly calmed down. She stood up and patted off the yellow sand and dust on her dress. She tidied up her messy black hair and the slanted sable scarf on her forehead. She slowly asked, "Can I choose a way to die that isn't ugly?" Chapter 1262. Su Fengnian did not answer this question. Instead, he smiled and said, "Do you have anything that can be exchanged for your life? For example, the movements of Dong Zhuo and Lu Gui's armies? Or do you have any news about the orphans of Yelu de Tong? Or else you can talk about the two large camps of heavy cavalry in Beimang." The corners of her mouth twitched. She did not hide her sarcasm at all. Su Fengnian's thumb gently pushed the knife out of its sheath. At this moment, a rider galloped over. On the back of the horse was a young rider whose face was covered in blood. He even had an extra horse with him. Looking at his attire and accessories, it was neither fish nor fowl. He had the armor and saber of the Lu Centurion, as well as the unique short saber of Black Fox Lang. On his back was a huge bow with carved feathers. It was likely that this rider had made a fortune from the dead. Princess Hongyan turned her head to look at the rider who had just survived a disaster. Her eyes were full of disdain and hatred. She did not need to think to know that this was a traitor. On the Beimang grasslands, this kind of man had the lightest bones. The young rider who had relied on horsemanship and archery to enter the personal cavalry of the Lu general stopped his horse and panted heavily. He also looked at the woman with the mink hair covering her forehead. Previously, in the army camp, he had only seen her a few times from a distance. At that time, one of the generals had respectfully led her and her entourage to the general's tent. He did not even dare to think that he would be able to talk to this kind of rich and noble woman in his lifetime. As for the disdain in her eyes at this moment, this young man who had indeed defected couldn't help but lower his eyelids. However, he quickly raised his head. He did not look at the woman who made people feel ashamed of their inferiority. Instead, he looked at the slender back of the swordsman. His body began to tremble uncontrollably. The previous scene was still vivid in his mind. Including him, the 300 riders began to retreat and flee. This swordsman of similar age had cast sand flying swords out of thin air. When he turned around, he saw with his own eyes that the swords had pierced through the backs of his fellow soldiers. Occasionally, a knight would use his scimitar to shatter the flying swords, but he could not stop the second flying sword from piercing through his chest. A comrade was pierced through his shoulder by a flying sword and fell off his horse. His entire body was nailed into the sand. While the man was chasing after the comrade, he casually stretched out his hand and pressed down. The injured comrade who was struggling for his life a few feet away sank into the ground, stirring up a cloud of yellow sand. Then he disappeared without a sound. After one of the Black Fox Lanzi fell off his horse, his entire chest was pierced by a flying sword. He staggered as he charged towards this person, but this person brushed past him. The black fox Lanzi's legs left the ground, and his head seemed to have been hit by a heavy hammer. He leaned back and fell heavily to the ground. A centurion of the personal guards of the Lu army was lying on the ground, barely breathing. That person used the cold blade in his hand, which had yet to be unsheathed, to knock lightly on his head. Just like that, his entire head exploded. When that person got closer and closer to him as if possessed, he no longer urged his horse to run wildly. Instead, he turned his horse around and blocked the path. However, he did not go to his death. Instead, he waited for death. He did not know what he was doing. He only watched as that person continuously controlled the flying sword to kill people. If there was someone next to him who had not yet breathed their last, he would use the cold blade in his scabbard or a newly forged flying sword to finish them off expressionlessly. At that moment, in the eyes of this little pawn who was in a state of death, the entire sky was like a swarm of flying swords. Then these flying swords wove together into a vast net. There were 6 or 7 black fox Lanzi who were fighting like trapped beasts. They passed by the dazed pawn, roaring as they charged towards that person. Then, both the riders and their horses were carried into the sky by the flying swords with astonishing penetrative power. In the end, they fell to the ground together. In his eyes, for a few moments, he seemed to see that person breathing in and out. One breath was as fine as a drop of water. One breath was like a gently trembling lotus leaf. One breath was like a whale swallowing heaven and earth. For some reason, that person brushed past him but did not kill him. When he was the only one left alive among the 300 riders, that person appeared by his side. Using fluent Beimang language, he ordered him to pick any armor, swords, and arrows he wanted. Then he asked him to bring an extra warhorse and leave with him. Probably because he felt that he had already died once, the young rider at that time had forgotten his fear. After returning from the gates of hell, he still had the mood to pick up those good items that he had long been envious of. He changed into a good horse, put on armor, equipped himself with a war blade, and carried a large bow on his back. Not a single item was left behind. The young man even changed into a new pair of sturdy leather boots for himself. The wind swept up the yellow sand. The only ones left alive were these 3 people and 2 horses. Princess Hongyan looked at Su Fengyan. She pointed at the young rider and said through gritted teeth, "You killed him." Su Fengyan used a gaze that looked like he was sizing up a madman. He looked mischievously at this most noble woman of the imperial family in the desert. "He's worth much more than you." Su Fengyan continued, "He won't die. But I'll give you one last chance. As long as you can take out something valuable enough to buy your life, I'll promise not to kill you." Princess Hongyan screamed crazily, "Kill him. This kind of person doesn't deserve to be a Beimang man." Su Fengyan raised his arm and made a cold gesture of chopping at the young rider. The rider steadied his breathing and began to charge forward with his blade without hesitation. Princess Hongyan was completely dumbfounded. She could allow herself to die at the hands of the king of Beiliang. But she would never allow herself, a princess of Beimang, the only daughter of the Yushan province's provincial magistrate, who was deeply doted on by the empress, to die under the blade of a grassland traitor. Moreover, this nameless coward was so despicable. She smiled bitterly and looked at Su Fengyan with hatred. Then she quickly pulled out a dagger and stabbed it toward her own heart. Chapter 1263. The sun was setting in the west, and the 2 riders were riding slowly on a flat sandy land commonly known as Longan. 30 miles to the south was Huda City, the most majestic city in Beiliang's border. There were 30,000 elite soldiers, 3,000 heavy cavalry, 6,000 light cavalry, and more than 20,000 infantry inside and outside the city. Even if the people in the city were not listed as soldiers, as long as they were in the prime of their lives, they could put on armor and fight on horseback in a hurry. Behind Huda City was the newly established Huayang Pass of the Protectorate of Northern Liang. To the left and right of Huayang Pass were the 2 great pass cities of Liuya and Taifuling, both of which had more than 10,000 soldiers. Unlike Huda City, which had an absolute advantage in terms of infantry, Liuya and Taifuling were almost entirely composed of cavalrymen in light armor. Clearly, they were different from Huda City, which was mainly used to stop the northern Mang's army from advancing south. These 2 border cities, which were slightly inferior in scale, were more responsible for taking the initiative to attack. Behind the first line of defense was the second line of defense, with Jinyuan, Qinghe, and Grave as the fulcrum, and Shenkan and Xinwu as the flanks in the north of Liangzhou, followed by the Great Snow Dragon Cavalry, which was stationed at the border of Liangzhou all year round, and the 2 deputy commanders of infantry and cavalry, Qin Yunshui and He Zhonghu's army. Coupled with the crisscrossing watchtowers of Wubao Castle, There was no doubt that the northern border of Liangzhou was the most difficult battlefield in Beiliang. Generally speaking, Beimeng was the least likely to attack the heavily guarded northern line of Liangzhou. If the northern barbarians really wanted to open their mouths and take over this place, it would not be as simple as breaking teeth and swallowing blood. Compared to northern Liangzhou's northern line, Yozhou's side was mostly infantrymen. That was why infantry great commander Yan Wenwan's tent was also located there. Regardless of whether it was the terrain of Yozhou's northern line or the distribution of troops, it all decided that Yuzhou would be a typical offensive and defensive battle between the nomads of the north and the farmers of the central plains, one side attacking, one side defending. It wasn't like northern Liang's northern line where they relied on Su family's armored cavalry to fight northern Mang's cavalry on horseback. Originally, the Dragon Elephant Cavalry was stationed in the middle of Liangzhou and Liangzhou, so they could support both sides at any time and even roam around looking for opportunities. However, with the establishment of the 4th province, Liuzhou, and the 30,000 Long Xiang army stationed there, a crack appeared in the close relationship between Liangzhou and Liangzhou. The number one city in the northwest of the Liang dynasty wasn't the provincial capital of the northern Liang, Liangling, and Nether provinces, but rather this tiger-head city that appeared out of nowhere and looked down on northern Mang. On the border of Liangzhou, there were some passes like Tuma Pass for merchants to enter and leave Liangmang, but to the north of Liangzhou there was none. This place was destined to be filled with smoke signals and 100 battles, but never the sound of the camel bells of the caravans. Although there were only 2 riders, one of them was dragging a wretched woman whose hands were tied up. She was covered in dust, her lips were dry and cracked, and the pair of delicate embroidered shoes on her feet, which looked like those of a graceful girl from Jiangnan, were also in tatters, revealing her bloody toes. Her body was on the verge of collapse, but she was still holding on. When she was able to raise her head and look into the distance towards Tigerhead City that was rumored to be most fond of displaying the heads of northern Mang captives, because of this untimely pause, she was dragged to the ground by the warhorse. That horseman didn't turn around. She struggled with all her might to get up, or else she would be dragged towards Tigerhead City like this. However, she was already too exhausted to stand up, only able to turn around. A wave of scorching pain came from her back as she slid across the gravel. This type of pain didn't come from how great the pain was in an instant, but rather from the endless, bit-by-bit accumulation. That Beimeng rider who was following orders couldn't help but turn his head to shoot a glance. This woman who was sitting high up in the clouds fell off the altar just like that, and in the end was dragged forward by him and his mount like a dog. He turned his head to look at the rider in front of him. He didn't know why this person didn't kill him, and he also didn't know why he didn't kill her. In the distance there was a commotion. A group of several hundred riders with a majestic aura shook the earth as they approached. His heart contracted violently. This was the first time in his life that he had seen such a large number of Beiliang cavalry. He also quickly discovered that the Beiliang cavalry was different from the Lu cavalry he used to be in. The Lu cavalry was undoubtedly brave and ruthless when they broke through enemy lines and killed the enemy. After he joined the army he was also like this. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to become one of General Lu Gui's personal guards. However, the feeling these northern Liang cavalry gave him was even more frightening. Previously, when he fought with the crossbowmen, it wasn't that obvious. He only felt that those well-known northern Liang crossbowmen's strength was indeed astonishing. However, when their numbers exceeded 300, it gave him an extremely strange feeling, as if these 300 to 400 cavalry were a single entity. When they urged their horses and brandished their whips, it was filled with a type of forbearance and restraint that would make all of the northern Mang's brave warriors feel extremely uncomfortable. The Huda city garrison in front of him even had the same degree of movement every time their bodies rose and fell along with the backs of their horses. He had only heard that the 2 large groups of heavy cavalry that had been raised with countless amounts of gold and silver could truly advance side by side when they were completely spread out in formation to charge in a single line. These 400 riders dismounted almost at the same time. The leading middle-aged rider knelt on one knee. He lowered his head and cupped his fists. General Lu Jinu pays his respects to the prince. Then the 400 riders said in unison, "Respects to the prince." Su Fengyin smiled and said, "Rise all of you. This time I've troubled General Lu to come out of the city to welcome me." The young captive behind Su Fengyin who could still ride a horse and put on armor was stunned for a moment. He couldn't quite wrap his head around it. However, when he saw General Lu, who was wearing armor and carrying a crossbow and looked exactly like the rider behind him, stand up, he seemed to be a cripple. Chapter 1264. Then he knew who this plain-looking lame general was. He was Beiliang's #1 border general, Huda City's guard general Lame Lu. He didn't know who Lu Jinu was, but almost every soldier with the surname Lu had heard of this legendary Lame Lu in the desert. This person was different from Beimang's valiant generals, who were cursed at in Beimang the more they performed. Lame Lu was recognized as a great general in the world by the scholars of Beimang's southern dynasty. He governed the army strictly, but outside of the battlefield, he treated the soldiers like his own children. He had 2 sons and 2 daughters. His sons had died at the border, and his youngest son had died at the age of 16. Both of his daughters had married his subordinates, and both of them had become widows. Lame Lu was never merciful to his enemies, but he never killed the innocent. 14 years ago, during a long-distance revenge raid, he went deep into the heart of Gusai province and beheaded tens of thousands of people along the way. His leg had been pierced by a captive woman with a dagger, but Lame Lu still didn't kill her. He only left behind a sentence that no one knew whether it was true or false, but was widely spread on the grasslands. No matter if it's our Beiliang or your Beimang, only when all the men are dead will it be your women's turn. Lu Jinu accompanied Su Fengyin to the majestic Tiger Head city. More than half of his life was spent there. Looking at the tall city walls, the eyes of this military general, who had achieved great feats on the battlefield, were unusually warm. The 400 elite riders behind them slowly turned their horses around and returned. They couldn't help but glance at the 2 strange people. The young man riding the horse was dressed in northern barbarian attire and carried a lot of weapons. He was dragging a woman with a mink forehead who could only walk pitifully. After entering the city, Su Fengyin took a bath and changed his clothes. Lu Jinu and a few Huda city captains stood respectfully at the steps of the outer courtyard. The last time Su Fengyin patrolled the border as the new Prince Liang, he stopped at Huayang Pass and didn't come here. It was said that the captains at that time complained that this prince looked down on their Huda city and treated the soldiers of Huda city as the children of Beiliang's stepmother. The captain who led the 3,000 heavy cavalry openly declared that if he had the ability, he would let the cowardly garrison at Huayang Pass practice martial arts with him. He didn't want to bully the cavalry of Huayang Pass because they were light cavalry. At worst, he could borrow another 2,000 or 3,000 soldiers from them. He could still beat those guys without 3 rounds of charge. Su Fengyin saw a strong man who pretended to be calm but was obviously a little restrained. He waved his hand and motioned for the pillars of Huda city to sit down and talk. With Lu Jinu's experience and military achievements, he could talk calmly with the old Prince Liang. Of course, he wouldn't be at a loss when facing Su Fengyin, the new Prince of Beiliang. He calmly sat on the stone bench. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw Ma Jili, who had scolded him the most after drinking, move the stone bench and sit at the back like a shy little girl who didn't dare to see her lover. Su Fengyin tilted his head as if he was looking for someone. He deliberately asked with a smile, "General Lu is Captain Ma who said that even if he can't beat me in martial arts, he can drink me down?" Lu Jinu held back his laughter and didn't speak. The captains, who were as rough as the sandstorm in the frontier fortress, couldn't help but laugh out loud. Their laughter was full of straightforward kindness. No matter how feminine a man was, he would probably be hardened by the scorching sun here year after year. No matter how narrow-minded a man was, he would probably be bullied by the vast sky here day after day. Ma Jili straightened his back and stuck his head out from behind his comrade's back. Reporting to Wuxia, he said, "Lowly officer is here. If you, senior, are really angry and want lowly officer to eat a whip, lowly officer will have no objection. But when I'm being whipped, can you find a place where my subordinates can't see? Otherwise I'll be laughed at by those guys." Su Fengyin obviously didn't want to bicker with this man. He asked, "General Lu, can everyone drink?" Lu Jinu nodded and joked, "Of course, everyone can drink. That's how it is when these people fight. When it comes to drinking, everyone is number one. However, Ma Jili and Chu Hanqing both have to be on night patrol. As long as the others don't get too drunk, it's fine." Su Fengyin grunted, "Then let's stop drinking. We can only make up for what we owe in the future." Lu Jinu turned his head and shouted, "Ma Jili, go with Chu Hanqing and bring 2 jars of wine here. Then go on night patrol." Ma Jili was relieved. He ran out of the courtyard with another captain and quickly returned with 2 jars of green ant wine. Feeling guilty, Ma Jili didn't dare to stay any longer. He wanted to run away quickly. Chu Hanqing, the elegant captain of Huda city, hesitated for a moment. He looked at Su Fengyin and asked, "Your Highness, I can't drink tonight. I don't know when and where I can drink next time. Can I use an empty bowl to offer a toast to your Highness?" Su Fengyin nodded. Chu Hanqing raised the empty bowl high. Su Fengyin stood up and drank the green ant wine in one gulp. Majili asked nervously. Your Highness, how about I also offer you a toast? Su Fengyin smiled and drank another bowl. Su Fengyin sat back down on the stone bench. He looked at the border officers who all had sincere smiles on their faces and asked, General Lu, is there anything else Huda City needs? Feel free to ask. Lu Jinu held the bowl in one hand and rested the other on his lame leg. He shook his head with a smile and said, There's nothing else. Su Fengyin didn't say anything else. He drank silently with these old generals of northern Liang who were already over 40 years old. In the end, Lu Jinu only said one sentence. Since your Highness is sitting here, then I can say something that I thought I couldn't say. Huda City has more than 40,000 people. Today they've all drunk your Highness farewell wine. Even if they die they have no regrets. Chapter 1265. When Lu Jinu and the other generals left the courtyard, Su Fengyin had the guards outside call for the two captives. Elsewhere, Commandery Princess Hongyan was wolfing down food. When she reluctantly walked into the courtyard, her clothes were still ragged, but her mouth was greasy. When she crossed the threshold she even burped. This made the Lu cavalry soldier beside her, who was still wearing his armor and carrying his saber and bow, feel curious. He probably realized that a woman like her was not truly otherworldly after all. There was still half a jar of green ant wine left on the table. Clearly Lu Jinu and the others had shown mercy. Su Fengyin picked up the wine bowl and pointed at a few stone stools. Commandery Princess Hongyan sat down. The young cavalry soldier, who respected Su Fengyin more and more like a god, still stood obediently. Commandery Princess Hongyan glanced at the wine jar and bowl on the table and subconsciously sniffed. She was not afraid of itching when she had so many lice, so she poured herself a bowl of wine. She had tasted green ant wine at Falling Horse Pass, and even in the imperial court and the capital. She did not think it tasted that good before, but today the wine burned from the tip of her tongue to her throat, and then to her stomach. Her entire body instantly warmed up. She felt warm and full. At the same time she looked at Su Fengyin with more provocation. She knew that Su Fengyin did not let her commit suicide, so it would be harder for her to die than to live. Of course this was not necessarily a good thing. Before entering Tiger Head City, she had thought of countless sinister ways Su Fengyin could humiliate her as Commandery Princess Hongyan. However, looking at the current situation, while the situation was indeed terrible, it was still within her acceptable range. She raised her head and drank the wine in the bowl in one big gulp. Wiping the corner of her mouth, she said with a charming smile, What? Does your Highness want me to serve you in bed? Then why don't you let me change into a clean set of clothes? Su Fengyin asked in return, Do you need me to send you a mirror so you can look at yourself? Princess Hongyan flew into a rage out of humiliation. Just as she was about to raise her hand to throw the wine bowl away, she quickly suppressed this impulse. She silently poured another bowl of wine. Every bowl she could get was a bowl. Su Fengyin ignored the featherless phoenix. He turned his head to look at the rider who called himself Chifu Longguan and said, You are very talented in martial arts. That is why I did not kill you. There was another reason that Su Fengyin did not mention. From the eyes of the dragon crown, one could not see the hatred that even an outsider like Princess Hongyan would have. Even if a person could hide their expression in eyes, the flow of their qi could not be hidden from Su Fengyin's eyes. The fluctuation of qi was directly related to happiness, anger, sorrow, and joy. This meant that Chifu Longguan, this unpolished jade that had been buried, might be able to go very far on the path of martial arts. Of course, the most important reason was that Su Fengyin hoped that there would be someone who could balance his disciple Yudilong in the future. This child was the youngest but was the eldest disciple. Unlike Wang Sheng and Lu Yunzhang, whose personalities were clear, there were too many uncertainties. Su Fengyin did not want to have another Xianyuan Pan in his hands in the future. As for Chifu Longguan, he was like a random cat or dog picked up from the side of the road. His talent in martial arts was not the best that Su Fengyin had seen, but he was the most interesting. For example, Jiang and I and the charcoal girl of the Guanyin sect were called sword embryos. For example, Hong Shixiang and Zhao Ningxin of Longhu Mountain were the reincarnations of enlightened masters and were called Bodhi seeds. The Buddhist sect also had the concept of reincarnated spiritual children. As for Chifu Longguan, he was a little different. He had a bit of everything and nothing was pure. But this was precisely the case. He was most in line with Su Fengyin's martial arts journey. Moreover, in that battle, Chifu Longguan had truly caught the thin line between the breaths of Su Fengyin, this celestial being. In the present world, there were less than a handful of such people, and this nameless soldier was one of them. Chifu Longguan was only 18 years old, but he was already one of Lu Gui's personal cavalry. One had to know that the number one saber user, Gu Jiantang, might not even be as good as Chifu Longguan at this age. Of course, Su Fengyin was even more so back then. Chifu Longguan was a bit nervous. He said in a trembling voice, "King of Bailiang, this lowly one has been an orphan since young. I'll go wherever there's food to eat. If your highness doesn't trust this lowly one, you can let this lowly one join the Bailiang frontier army. Even a foot soldier is fine. I won't hesitate to kill Beimang." At this time, Princess Hongyan laughed sinisterly and fanned the flames. "Orphan? Maybe your parents died under the hooves of the Bailiang cavalry? It's never too late for a gentleman to take revenge." Chifu Longguan was not as shrewd as her, but he was no fool. He couldn't hold back and cursed, "Bitch! Bullshit your mother." The young man said with red eyes, "My parents were beaten to death by you rich and powerful bastards from the Southern Dynasty." Princess Hongyan was furious. The Southern Dynasty? What is the Southern Dynasty? The entire Southern Dynasty is just a watchdog raised by the Yelu family. I am Yelu Hongkai, a lowly person like you who can't even walk within 100 steps of me. Chifu Longguan's breathing was rapid, his chest heaving up and down. He took a big step forward and slapped this woman. Princess Hongyan was not a blockhead. She lowered her head and retreated, hiding behind Su Fengyin like a wisp of smoke. She chattered with a smug expression, "Hey, you can't hit me. Look at you, you deserve to never be able to avenge your parents. Oh, maybe trash like you was in the army and worked for the Southern Dynasty. Maybe you worked for those enemies." Chifu Longguan suddenly calmed down and stared at this woman. Princess Hongyan felt a bone-deep chill. She carefully took back the wine bowl and poured herself another bowl of green ant wine. At this time there was a light knock on the door. Su Fengyin poured 2 bowls of wine and said softly, "Senior Tan, please come in." Chapter 1266. When the uninvited guest sat down, Su Fengyin passed her a bowl of wine. The other party did not stand on ceremony and drank a mouthful of wine. Her cheeks were slightly red. Yelu Hongkai looked at this tall lady curiously. Every move she made showed the bearing of a grandmaster. There was also a kind of heart-tugging free and easy style. Su Fengyin smiled and asked, "Senior, how did you know that I have arrived at Tiger Head City?" Tantai Pingjing said indifferently, "I heard from my master that the celestial beings look down on all living things in the world, just like how we look at the fireflies in the summer night. Most of the fireflies are fleeting, but there are always a few that are especially bright. At some point they are even as bright as the stars." Su Fengyin suddenly understood. It must have been because they had intercepted and killed the 400 cavalrymen earlier that the Qi Refinement Grandmaster, who was good at observing aura, caught some clues. Then she was just waiting for them near Tiger Head City. According to Tantai Pingjing, or to be precise, according to the explanation of this master of the sect, the top masters of the world were only the people of the world of the immortals in the clouds. However, for masters like Bodhisattva Tuoba and Chao Zhangqing, the fireflies they emitted were particularly eye-catching. Qi refinement warriors were mending the net of law on behalf of the heavens. Naturally, it would be easier for them to find this small group of experts. Su Fengyin asked, "Can it be said that when people seek Tao and attain Tao, they are using the light of a grain of rice to compete with the brightness of the moon?" Tantai Pingjing shook her head and said, "Master said that after cultivating Tao, it is nothing more than a drop of water in the sea. The water of the Yellow River comes from the sky? No, it comes from the sea. Therefore it flows into the sea and never returns? No." Su Fengyin joked, "Your master's words are so sharp, so reasonable." Tantai Pingjing dismissed it with a smile as if she was a venerable. Su Fengyin stared at Princess Hongyan, who wanted to secretly pour a bowl of wine for herself. The latter retracted her hand resentfully. Su Fengyin pointed at the courtyard door. Chifu Longguan took the lead and left. Princess Hongyan waited for a moment and guessed that the brat had gone far away. Only then did she sneak over to the courtyard door and cross the threshold. In the end, a crisp and clear pa sound was heard, followed by Princess Hongyan's furious curses. Tantai Pingjing said softly, "Your Highness has a good eye." Su Fengyin was puzzled. "What do you mean?" She took a small sip of wine. "This man and woman are both people with good fortune. They are worthy of Prince's care." Su Fengyin sneered, "Luck?" Tantai Pingjing's expression didn't change. "If your luck is too good, then that is your destiny. If it were a normal person, would they be able to survive if they had an extra 100 lives when facing a martial arts expert who had started a massacre?" Su Fengyin was about to speak when Tantai Pingjing shook her head and said, "You have your reasons, but it doesn't change the fact that they survived." She continued, "According to our previous agreement, Our Guanyin sect will stay south of Huayang Pass and north of Qinghe Pass. We will also do our best to gather good fortune for Bailiang. However, whether we stay or leave in the end is not up to the Bailiang Frontier Army to decide. Su Fengyin nodded. Of course. She still asked bluntly, what if your highness unfortunately dies? Su Fengyin said helplessly, don't worry. If that day really comes, I will give it all to that charcoal girl before I die. Tantai Pingjing hovered the wine bowl and asked seriously, the war is imminent. Isn't it a bit unlucky for you to say this to me? Su Fengyin smiled at the woman who seemed to be completely ignorant of worldly affairs and asked, what do you think? Tantai Pingjing rested one arm on the stone table and the other hand holding the wine bowl. She raised her head to look at the starry sky. Su Fengyin was in a peaceful mood. He closed his eyes and slowly took a sip of wine. The two people who didn't look at each other casually asked and answered each other's questions. The Beimang army's forces on the border are almost at their limit, but they still have spare soldiers and horses to launch the next wave of attacks on the northern grasslands. Faced with an enemy that the entire Liang dynasty should be able to contend against, aren't you worried about Liuzhou, which has the least danger? Of course I'm worried. It's probably like when Su Xiao watched me go to the Central Plains and Beimang. To attack Liangzhou, Liuzhou, or Yuzhou, which one to attack first has its advantages and disadvantages for Beimang? What do you think? In truth, it doesn't matter where we attack first. My father, Su Xiao, my master, Li Yishan, Yuan Zuozong, Chu Lushan, Yan Wenwan, Chen Yunchue, He Zhonghu, and people like Lu Jinu of Hudu have already done the best they can for Bailiang. You might not believe it, but I'm beginning to think that Bailiang might really be able to hold on. But I don't know who will die on the battlefield in Bailiang. I don't want to know. Then why hasn't Tuoba appeared on the border? It's just like how the Zhao clan Son of Heaven wants to keep Gu Jiantang in the north and not let him go to Guangling Road, because this is the dynasty's final trump card. When that old woman and the imperial tutor needed Tuoba to personally take action, it meant that the situation was starting to slip out of control. Before this, they were all confident that victory was in their grasp. Tantai Pingjing suddenly asked a very off-topic question. Why didn't you kill that Beimang princess? Su Fengyin laughed involuntarily. After a moment of silence, he looked at the starry sky with her. Of course it's not that I like her. It's just that she reminds me of someone I miss very much. We both like Martin forehead coverings, have the same bad reputation, and have the same unyielding character. I could have killed her but I didn't because I wanted her to know how difficult it is to live. Tantai Pingjing poured the last bit of wine into her bowl and finished it in one gulp. Who do you really care about? Su Fengyin stretched out his finger and pointed at the starry sky. He said gently, my elder sister is there. After some time, Su Fengyin came back to his senses. He could not help but hold his forehead and sigh. This number 1 Qi refinement warrior of the dynasty, who had extraordinary status and strength, not only fell asleep drunk, but was also snoring on the table. Su Fengyin could read her mind. He looked at her and sighed. You must be missing your master, right? Chapter 1267. As the morning mist rose, a group of people rode out of Tiger Head City's south gate and parted ways. Chifu Longguan changed into the armor of the Bailiang Light Cavalry, and at the same time received a new identity card. His name was also changed to Chifu Longguan. From today onwards he was a member of the Bailiang Frontier Army. When he left the city, the young man who had betrayed Beimang would occasionally touch the cold saber at his waist. The Bailiang war saber was known as the Grand Su style, which meant that all war sabers in the world had to be made using the Su family's war saber. Chifu Longguan knew that if this war saber was sold in the royal court, it would be impossible to get it without 500 taels of silver. Moreover, there was a price but no market. Countless members of the royal family and the grassland were proud to be able to collect the complete set of Su Yangliang's saber. Chifu Longguan, who was used to being poor, had such a saber. His back straightened a bit and he always felt that he was now a rich man. But there was a secret that made the young rider even more excited than the cold saber light crossbow and his identity. The king of Bailiang had passed on to him a nameless saber manual and a set of Wudong mantras. Chifu Longguan was now full of pride, and he was also willing to fight on the battlefield for the young new king of Liang. He followed the king of Bailiang's orders to escort Princess Hongyan to Luzhou. As long as he threw this Yelu woman to the border, he could ignore her. When the time came he could directly join the Longxiang army. After that, whether he lived or died in the Battle of Liangmang would depend on his own luck. Yelu Hongkai hesitated, then turned his horse around and spurred it to catch up to Su Fengyin. He stopped his horse to block the way and said in a low voice, "You're just going to let me go back to Beimang like this?" Su Fengnian smiled and said, "What else? Let the Jade Cicada Prefecture take out a mountain of gold and silver to redeem you? Even if your father is willing to pay, you are destined not to return alive. A proper princess captured by Bailiang as a captive, the Yelu family probably can't afford to lose face." Yelu Hongkai wanted to say something but stopped. Su Fengnian waved his hand and said, "Your life and death has no bearing on the big picture. Don't think too highly of yourself." Yelu Hongkai smiled playfully and said, "I originally wanted to reveal the whereabouts of the Beimeng army, but since you don't want to listen to my calculations and guesses, then forget it." Su, Yelu Hongkai's eyes, Yelu Hongkai. The woman narrowed her eyes, her face as dark as water. She fiercely slammed her horse whip and brushed past the repulsive fellow. Su Fengnian and Tantai Pingjing continued on their way to Huayang Pass. Seeing the questioning look of this Qi refinement grandmaster, Su Fengnian smiled softly and said, "Given Yelu Hongkai's scheming nature, I can't expect her to tell me the truth. She might even lie about the military situation to trick me once. Instead of being tormented by her words and becoming suspicious of everything, I might as well not listen." Yelu Hongkai smiled and said, "My intuition tells me that once this lady speaks, she will speak the truth." Su Fengnian mocked himself, "It sounds like we have suffered a great loss?" But he did not call back Princess Hongyan, who might be kind-hearted once in a while. Tantai Hongyan smiled and did not speak anymore. She was tall. Although she was 100 years old, her face was still youthful. She was dressed in snow-white clothes. When she galloped, her clothes fluttered in the wind, like a huge white lotus blooming on the desert. At this moment, this scene was worthy of being described as shocking. After a moment of silence, Tantai Hongkai suddenly asked curiously, "Beimeng has a huge debate on whether to attack the Bailiang in the west or the Liang dynasty in the east. If not for the mysterious royal tutor from the chess and sword music school and the new king of the south courtyard, Dong Zhuo, who insisted on attacking the Bailiang first, you Bailiang would be the laughingstock of Gujiantang now. Apart from that, most of the Beimeng generals and officials, as well as the most powerful factions in the grassland, felt that it was more worthwhile to attack the east. After all, if they defeated the two lines of defense, they would be able to force their way to Great Peace City. They might even be able to cooperate with West Chu's revival in Guangling Road. This would exhaust the Liang dynasty's army and make them unable to cooperate with each other. Why would the Empress of Beimeng stand her ground against all opinions and agree to fight the Bailiang to the death? Isn't this exactly what the Empress of the Zhao family wanted? Besides, even if we take down Bailiang, we still have Qinjibao's Western Shu as a buffer." Su Fengnian smiled and interrupted Tantai Hongkai's words. "It's very simple. Beimeng can attack Bailiang with all their strength, but they definitely won't dare to attack the Liang dynasty in the east. They don't dare to expose their butts to the 300,000 border soldiers of Bailiang. The Bailiang cavalry, who have experienced hundreds of battles, not only have unparalleled mobility, they are also very familiar with the desert terrain and long-distance raids. The northern Mang dared to send 200,000 soldiers to sit opposite Gujiantang, drink wine, eat meat, drink tea and admire the moon. If it was the northern Liang, they would have eaten until not even the bones were left. Then they would swagger in and the entire southern dynasty would suffer. It's not that the Taiping Commandery and Fatty Dong don't know what the Liang imperial court is planning, but they don't have a choice. If they don't take down Bailiang in one go and attack the eastern line that seems simple but is actually controlled by Jianghu, Gujiantang, and Qinjibao, Beimeng would be wasting their national strength. And the most important thing is, Tantai Hongkai suddenly understood and nodded. "I understand. As long as the Bailiang cavalry stays in the northwest, it means that even if the Liang dynasty loses the eastern line and even causes Great Peace City to be trapped, they still have enough initiative to change the stalemate. However, if Beimeng successfully defeats Bailiang in one go, the initiative will switch to the Beimeng Empress. In particular, if the Bailiang cavalry, known as the best in the world, is completely wiped out, no matter how much the people of the Central Plains dislike the Bailiang Su family, they have already lost half of their souls. If even Bailiang can't stop Beimeng's iron hooves going south, then who can stop them?" Su Fengnian sighed emotionally. Ever since Zhang Julu came to power, he didn't really support the military affairs of the northwest border, but he also didn't restrict them too much. This is also the strength of the Grand Secretary. It seems quiet and inactive, and there are suspicions that Bailiang is nurturing a tiger, but in reality he is helping the Zhao family win a day of sitting on the mountain and watching the tigers fight. Tantai Hongkai gazed at Great Peace City in the east and murmured, "The son of the Zhao family has already made a choice between home and country. Liang is committing suicide." Chapter 1268. Su Fengnian sneered, "That's why the court is waiting for a good show to begin, but the biggest contributor behind the scenes won't be able to see this day. Isn't it because they're afraid that the new emperor won't be able to suppress the old grand secretary? They're afraid that too many poor carps will jump over the dragon's gate. When these wild carps enter the court and gradually band together, they'll all be barefooted guys who aren't afraid of wearing shoes. If they die, then they die. In any case, they'll be alone in the world, unlike the sons of wealthy families who still have to consider the interests of the huge families behind them. Even if more than half of these poor men are greedy for the feeling of wealth and honor, as long as 2 or 3 of them refuse to be controlled and dare to stiffen their necks to oppose the emperor, pleading for the people all day long, then it'll be enough for the emperor of the Zhao family to suffer. The next person to sit on the dragon throne, Zhao Zhuan, doesn't have the military merit of the previous emperor unifying the Central Plains, nor does he have the current emperor's 20 years of experience of suppressing civil and military officials like Su Xiao, Zhang Julu, and Gu Jiantang. Zhao Zhuan's father, if he doesn't do something before he dies, how can he be at ease handing over the entire world to Zhao Zhuan? Therefore he painstakingly invited Qi Yanglong, who was already half in the yellow earth, to be the imperial tutor. By the time the old fellow stabilizes the situation in the court, he'll be about to die of old age. By that time, Zhao Zhuan will already be fully fledged. The vassal kings and generals will also have their military power stripped. In addition, he'll have the assistance of ministers like Yin Maochun, who don't have a deep enough foundation. He'll also be able to promote the sons and grandsons of wealthy families to keep the former in check. He won't have to be as diligent as the current emperor. He can just lie down comfortably and be the emperor. Sometimes, when I think about that blue-eyed man, I really feel that it's not worth it for him." Tantai Pingjing sighed. Su Fengnian said self-mockingly, "I just don't know if the Grand Secretary feels that it's not worth it for Beiliang?" Tantai Pingjing smiled and asked, "Is there resentment?" Su Fengnian exhaled and said in a deep voice, "My resentment is great." Tantai Pingjing said, "It just so happens that Beimeng bumped into the tip of Beiliang's blade." Su Fengnian looked at the sky. Perhaps this year's snow couldn't cover the blood. The headquarters of the Northern Liang Protectorate within Huayang Pass was still ridiculously simple and crude. This made the Huayang commandant Huang Laifu very nervous. Although he could not say that he was unable to eat or sleep in peace, every time he went to participate in the military affairs of the Protectorate General, he would always feel that this was not the case. A few of his close friends liked to use this matter to poke at him. Huang Laifu didn't even have a chance to talk back. He could only accept his fate. Over time he became the #1 joke in Liangzhou's northern border. But as the atmosphere of the impending war grew thicker and thicker, these harmless jokes quickly disappeared. Today Huang Laifu went to the Protector's manor to do official business. Recently, several generals and commanders were in the manor, discussing the deployment of Beimeng's troops and the direction of the main attack. Huang Laifu was a rough man who knew how to fight but was not good at talking. He couldn't get a word in. But when he heard the arguments of the old generals and commanders, he felt very comfortable. He felt that as long as they were in charge of the border, not to mention the fact that the Beiliang frontier army was strong and unharmed. Even if Huda City was accidentally lost, Huang Laifu would take it back without a second thought. When Huang Laifu walked into the lobby of the Protector's manor, which was hung with maps of various sizes, he obviously felt something strange. In the center of the lobby, there was a huge table made of yellow pear wood. On both sides of the table there were many new faces. Infantry Commander Yan Wenwan, an experienced general, should be visiting Huayang Pass for the first time. Cavalry Commander Yuan Zuozong was also here. Great Ancestor Gu Zhoukong, He Zhonghu and Qin Yunshui, the 4 new and old deputy commanders were here for the first time. Qi Danghua, one of the general's adopted sons, was also standing on one side. Yuzhou Provincial Governor Hu Kuei and Yuzhou General Huang Fuqiu stood side by side. Liangzhou Provincial Governor Wang Peifeng, who had just been promoted from Yuzhou Provincial Governor to a higher position, was trembling with fear. This Beiliang Provincial Governor, who could be said to have made a name for himself, was standing alone in the most remote corner. Obviously, on this occasion, the fart of any other armored general would be more effective than him, a civil official, shouting at the top of his lungs. But the person that shocked Huang Laifu the most was the second princess, Su Weisheng. She sat in a wheelchair, her hands interlaced as she stared at the map of the border on the table. The Beiliang Protector General held an inkstone in one hand and a brush in the other. The ink in the inkstone was crimson-red ink. Chu Lushan stood by Su Weisheng's side, bending over to draw red lines on the map while constantly speaking softly. Huang Laifu tiptoed over. There were already 20-some people standing on both sides of the table, so he could only find a place to sit. He just happened to hear Chu Lushan say in a low voice, "Earlier we sent a ballista archer into the heart of Gusai province and discovered that Lu Gui's army had already set out. Now we can confirm that they're heading for Liuzhou. Other than Lu Gui's 30,000 elite soldiers, the 4 military towns to the south, including tile-building Gentleman's Pavilion, have also moved out in full force. The old noble clans of Longguan have also brought out 30,000 infantry, and there are also the 8,000 Chang cavalry from Gusai province that require our attention. Together, these 100,000 soldiers are all heading for the current capital of Liuzhou, Azure City." Chu Lushan used his brush to point at a certain area north of Azure City. The 30,000 infantry from the noble clans of Longguan will be used as the main force to attack the city. This much is obvious. Then he lightly drew a line between Azure City and Linyao military town. If nothing unexpected happens, the 8,000 Chang cavalry will be waiting here to tie down the reinforcements on the western front of Liuzhou. If they can win, they fight. If they can't win, they run. The Chang cavalry doesn't have any other abilities, but their ability to run is top-notch. I've already experienced it for myself more than a decade ago. The generals in the room all smiled knowingly. During the first northern Mang-Liang battle, everyone knew that Chu Lushan, who shone brilliantly in the smoke of battle, had 2 regrets. The first was that he wasn't able to kill Dong Zhuo, who was also a fatty, and the second was that he actually wasn't able to chase down that routed Chang cavalry. Chu Lushan moved the tip of his brush, drawing a line between Liuzhou and Azure City. As the main force, Lu Gui's army should be here. Su Weisheng frowned. When he heard this, he interrupted Chu Lushan's words. Are they just going to retreat and let Lu Gui infiltrate Liuzhou? Even if Liuzhou only has 30,000 Longxiang army, they don't have to be so passive. Ancestor Gu bent over the map with his hands behind his back. He slowly said, if we say that Liuzhou and Yuzhou borders can wait, then Liuzhou doesn't need to wait. The 30,000 Longxiang army only needs to find Lu Gui's main force and defeat them. The rest of the scattered soldiers are nothing to be afraid of. Beiliang has this ability outside the gates of the Kingdom of War. The deputy commander of the cavalry, He Zhong, suddenly said, don't look at how Lu Gui's side has the advantage in numbers. This amount of soldiers isn't enough to fill the gaps between their teeth. Even if Dong Zhuo has a backup plan based on their current deployment, there won't even be enough time to collect the corpses of their warhorses. Chu Lushan extended 2 fingers and pinched the crimson tip of his brush. He turned a deaf ear to He Zhong's words. He only stared at his slightly ink-stained fingers and calmly said, the bait is too small to catch a big fish. Chu Lushan suddenly laughed. In the silent room it was particularly eye-catching. This protector general stuck his thumb and index finger together and raised his hand. He smiled and said, our Beiliang cavalry is too strong. We have to give our opponents a little bit of hope. Chapter 1269. There are only 2 chapters today. There was a side room in the Huayang Pass Protectorate Manor. Rumor had it that there were a bunch of petty officials gathered there. They were all insignificant officials who were neither learned nor trained in martial arts. However, the Protector General would often enter this side room. Other than that, this side room was rarely visited. Contrary to what the outside world had imagined, the side room was not desolate. There were only a few old pedants gathered together inside. On the contrary, it was very lively. Many young faces had appeared, making the room seem particularly lively. There were maps hanging on the east and west walls of the room. There were maps of the borders of Beiliang and the 2 provinces of Beimang. The maps on the 2 walls were the same. The only difference was that they were old. The east wall was old while the west wall was new. There were 2 people sitting at a table in the room. There was always a person standing at the table with a brush in his hand, in charge of recording some words. The tables were piled with Beimang records and secret files. Many of these things were probably not even available to the Southern Dynasty's Ministry of War and Ministry of Revenue. The reason why the east and west walls were divided into old and new ones was a suggestion made by a junior in the room. Since the enemy's commander-in-chief, Dong Zhuo, had been biding his time and did not show any signs of mobilizing troops, Beiliang might as well investigate the changes in the 2 provinces of Beimang that bordered Liangmang over the past few years. They circled the cities and towns that had increased their military strength in recent years, as well as the new courier routes that had been opened at great expense. They also focused on finding out the training grounds at the Beimang border over the years. The young man who gave this suggestion was surnamed Yu. It was said that he was an idle scholar who had gone to Liangmang to seek refuge in the Yamen, where he could not get enough money. Only then did he enter the room through his connections. There were 6 or 7 other miscellaneous officials who entered the room at the same time as you. Some of them were sons of generals who had studied the military and were born with a scholarly air. There were also some who had similar backgrounds as you. They were all scholars from other provinces who were picked up by others. Their ambitions were higher than the sky, but their lives were thinner than paper. Most of the older seniors in the room were frustrated people who had not made a name for themselves in the officialdom. They had one thing in common: their necks were hard and their knees were even harder. They did not know how to bow and bend their knees. Usually they liked to drown their sorrows in alcohol. Once they drank too much, they would naturally be unable to control their mouths and talk about the state affairs. Then one day they would suddenly be taken to the border by the Whispering Room spies. They did not even have the chance to say goodbye to their families before they disappeared into thin air. At first, they were scared witless, thinking that they were going to be beheaded by the temperamental Great Demon Chu. Later they found out that they were just helping to analyze the situation of the war. Gradually they calmed down. However, although they had become guests of the Protectorate General and were working for the Protectorate General, they did not have any official rank or salary. They were neither in heaven nor on earth, so it was not a pleasant job. Fortunately, these people had long worn away their ambitions in the officialdom. They were able to endure the dull and tedious work in the room. In addition, Lord Chu Lushan's reputation was too frightening. Every one of them was cautious and conscientious. They were afraid that one day Chu Lushan would feel that they were officials who did not want to work hard without complaint. Then with a crack their heads would be chopped off. The outsiders who often came in and out of the room were all people who had walked out of the Fu Shui room. They constantly sent strange things to the people in the room. There were documents on the recent promotions of the Ministry of War, reports from the Ministry of Revenue on the amount of grain that had been lost in various places. There were even papers of different textures. Specific details such as which beacon and which relay road had been repaired were written down. These Fu Shui room spies came and went hurriedly. When they entered the room they did not say a word. They put down the secret records and silently left, their eyes never looking sideways. In the words of Sir Hong, who was temporarily in charge of the room, they were ruthless people who killed without blinking and slept without closing their eyes. The older ones like Sir Hong believed in doing more and speaking less. At most, they would occasionally sigh with emotion. As for the young man called Udiji, he was even more like a newborn calf that was not afraid of a tiger. He dared to speak freely in the room. The young scholar Li Yu and Zhao Ying, whose father was the county magistrate of Lingzhou, had a great argument 2 days ago about whether the Beimang army should be attacking Liuzhou or not. The argument was so earth-shattering that even Sir Chu was alarmed. At dusk, Sir Hong, whose eyesight was not good, even though he was sitting by the window where the light was the best, he still lit an oil lamp. When he turned his head, he heard the sound of light footsteps that he was used to. Turning his head, he saw an extremely young and tender Fu Shui room spy. After entering the room, he handed over a letter to Wang Guifeng, who was in charge of receiving the item. Sir Hong no longer feared these people who had once made all of the Beiliang officials feel their hair stand on end. It was not that Sir Hong was bold, but after all, he was working for the Protector General. It was no different from having a golden protective talisman stuck to his forehead. What was there to be afraid of? However, it was impossible for Sir Hong to have a good impression of these people. It was not just him. Most of the people in the room did not want to have anything to do with the Fu Shui room. Sir Hong inadvertently discovered that after his old friend Wang Guifeng and the young spy walked out, he revealed a carefully concealed expression of disdain and bad luck. He used his fingers to pinch the document and quickly placed it on the young man Udiji's desk. Sir Hong stood up and pretended to look at the map on the wall. When he passed by Udiji's desk, he saw that it was a page that had been casually torn off by someone. Most of it was soaked in blood, but the blood had already dried. Chapter 1270. Sir Hong shook his head helplessly. These spies from the Fu Shui chamber were too careless. The things they sent over every few days were either wrinkled, as if they had been pulled out of the water, or grit could still be shaken out of them. Today it was even more exaggerated. It was even stained with blood. In the dusk outside the room, the young spy raised his arm and fiercely wiped his eyes. Then he walked down the steps and left with large strides. The spy saw a young man in casual clothes standing at the door to the courtyard. The two looked at each other. The spy's eyes were filled with well-hidden wariness. His intuition told him that if this person was an enemy he would probably die. The two brushed past each other. Even though the young spy knew that this person could appear in the Protectorate personally watched by Sir Chu, He was definitely not a spy from Beimang. However, the young man still subtly bent down slightly, one hand tucked into his sleeve. Only when the distance between them increased did he feel relieved. He realized that his hand holding the dagger was covered in sweat. The young spy was somewhat curious. That person was not very old, so why was he able to make him unconsciously assume a posture as if he was facing a great enemy? When Su Fengyan quietly walked into the room, Wang Guifeng, whose desk was near the door, raised his eyelids. He only thought that this was another spy from the Fushui chamber. He stood up and extended his hand. Su Fengyan asked quietly, "Where is the thing that was just sent over?" Yu Dezhi suddenly raised his head. Just as he was about to speak, he saw the incognito king of Beimang shake his head slightly. He understood and stood up, handing the paper to Su Fengyan. He was none other than Yu Wandao, the eldest grandson of the Yu family, a powerful clan in the Central Plains. His pseudonym was Yu Dezhi and he worked as a handyman in this house. He was a nobody, and he spent all his time picking and choosing from those secret records and documents. In fact, as long as Yu Wandao wanted to get an official position, Hu Kuei, the provincial governor of Jianghu, who was deeply respected by Su Fengyan, could make him a fourth-rank general, not to mention others. The piece of paper that Yu Wandao handed to Su Fengyan was a page from the famous prose collection, Small Window Leisure, written by Lu Jingsheng, the literary giant of the former Southern Tang dynasty. It was widely circulated among the remaining elders of the spring and autumn period. However, the pages of this Southern Tang edition could not be considered very valuable, and the text on the page was also very popular. However, the line of hastily written words added at the end of the page might not be worth 1,000 gold, but it was definitely more valuable than the life of the writer. Before the great battle, the scouts would die first. But many people didn't know that spies would die earlier. Moreover, they would only die silently. It couldn't even be considered tragic. Yu Wandao wanted to open his mouth to explain that those scattered, obscure and unwritten words should be linked together in the secret file unique to Fushui Room to explain why. Outsiders didn't know that Fushui Room had an extremely hidden book of explaining words. Different death warriors and spies corresponded to their own written explanations. Therefore, even if a secret spy report was intercepted by Beimang, it would still be meaningless. The spy who sent this page was codenamed 24-Foot in Fushui Room. Yu Wandao needed to flip to the 24th chapter of the Book of Explaining Words on his desk to obtain the exact content. Su Fengyan was silent. Tightly holding the page, he walked to the wall and raised his head to look at a map of Gusai Prefecture. Sir Hong was confused. Unlike those inflexible spies of Fushui Room, he guessed that this person might be the son of a general who was related to some important figure in the protectorate. Otherwise, he wouldn't be able to walk into this room. Looking at the situation, Yu Dezhi, whom he and Wang Guifeng privately said was Yu Dezhi, was most likely familiar with this person. Sir Hong pulled on Yu Dezhi's sleeve and said softly, "Little Yu, is this your friend? This is against the rules. If the Protector General finds out, you and I will both have to bear the consequences." Yu Wandao said softly, "It's fine." Even the usually easygoing Sir Hong couldn't help but feel anxious. The rules set by Protector General Chu were greater than the sky at the border of Bailiang. How could a little scholar say it was fine? When the time came, everyone in the room would be implicated by Yu Dezhi, who had broken the rules. Just as Sir Hong was about to remind the young man that it was time to leave the room, he suddenly heard the man murmur, "The historian's family is unfortunate, the country is fortunate, the country does not prosper, the family prospers." Sir Hong, who had studied hard for many years, immediately understood. Wasn't this a passage written by the great Southern Tang prose master Lu Jingsheng in Small Window Leisure? Next, Sir Hong saw the young man gently smooth out the wrinkled page and hand it back to Yu Dezhi. Yu Wandao took the page and handed it to Sir Hong. He said indifferently, "Sir Hong, this page can be filed away. I have already deciphered the words on the page. In a moment, I'll have to trouble you to have someone send it to Protector General Chu's study." Sir Hong took the page and glanced at it. He didn't have a deep impression. He only felt that the strokes were stiff and the transitions were stagnant. The woman played with the blade and the man embroidered flowers. It was truly unsightly. Sir Hong suddenly raised his head and saw the young man looking at him expressionlessly. He was immediately frightened. But soon the young man smiled and said softly, "Does Sir feel that the words on the page are somewhat unsightly?" Having been seen through, Sir Hong smiled awkwardly and didn't know how to respond. That person didn't make a fuss and only raised his voice slightly. "Everyone in the room has worked hard." After saying this, Sir Hong didn't have time to criticize before he walked straight to the door. Sir Hong first saw Wang Guifeng standing dumbstruck at the door. Then he saw Beiliang's protector General Chu Lushan, cavalry commander Yuan Zuozong, infantry commander Yan Wenwan, and many other people standing behind them. Sir Hong didn't dare to keep looking. If this wasn't shocking enough, then what made Sir Hong's scalp tingle was that the young man had just stepped over the threshold and walked out. Outside the house, a small group of people who deserved to be called the most powerful people in northern Liang were all making way for him. Chapter 1271. In the main hall of the Governor-General's office, Yan Wenwan looked at the young man wearing a black robe embroidered with gold. For some reason his mind wandered. He remembered that when the general had put on Prince Liang's blue satin robe, he, Zhong Hongwu, and Lu Yuanji couldn't help but go up and touch it. Of this group of old people, other than he Zhonghu and Qin Yunchui, Zhong Hongwu was dead. Wei Taizhan and Lu Yuanji had retired from the army and returned home to retire. As for the younger group, only half of the general's 6 adopted sons were left. Yan Wenwan, as an important leader of Changling's mountain, naturally had high hopes for Qin Zhibao. In the old man's mind, Beiliang's best day was when Su Fengyin was stationed outside Qin Zhibao's battle pass in Liangzhou. It was a pity that he would not be able to see this scene in this lifetime. Yan Wenwan gathered his thoughts. At this time, Su Fengyin was asking Chu Lushan about the movements of the Beimeng army. Chu Lushan could not give a definite answer. Even though Beiliang's spies and crossbowmen had suffered great losses, Dongzhu's messy deployment of troops confused the Governor-General's office. This was like a celestial phenomenon expert facing off against a Xian finger expert. He had the advantage but did not attack openly. At the same time he did not play any sinister sneak attacks. Instead he threw a flurry of punches on his own territory. He was not afraid of losing his footing. Su Fengyin joked. A large-scale shift of hundreds of thousands of troops is not child's play. This means that an astronomical amount of food and soldiers will be needed to support it. Fatty Dong is showing off his wealth to Beiliang? As one of the border commanders, Great Ancestor Gu's relationship with the new Prince Liang was purer than Yan Wenwan, Qin Yunchui and He Zhonghu. After all, they had met outside Beiliang, and had been an honored guest invited by Su Fengyin. So Great Ancestor Gu had more leeway in his words. He smiled and agreed. In any case, it is not really the wealth of this great king of the South Courtyard. It will not hurt to squander it. Chu Lushan's fingers were crossed in front of his chest, his thick arms resting on the armrests. His eyes narrowed, his lips moving as though he was talking to himself. Su Fengyin looked at Great Ancestor Gu. Before he could say anything, the #1 general of the old southern Tang straightened his back, straightened his clothes and said telepathically, "Prince Liang wants to ask if we can fight outside the border?" Su Fengyin nodded. The fall of the old southern Tang was because they had given Gu Jiantang all the initiative on the battlefield. All the elite troops withdrew into the territory, which led to the destruction of the navy and the subsequent defeat. Otherwise, according to Great Ancestor Gu's strategy, Gu Jiantang would have to pay at least 200,000 more casualties to take down the southern Tang. More importantly, the southern Tang could use this opportunity to build up their morale and not be afraid to fight to the death. Beiliang claimed to have 300,000 cavalrymen. Of course, not all of the 300,000 border soldiers were cavalrymen. In fact, only half of them were cavalrymen. But even if they had 150,000 cavalrymen and a jaw-dropping supply of hundreds of thousands of war horses, this was definitely the reason why Beiliang dared to compete with Beimeng. It could be said that if Beiliang did not have anything to worry about and if the imperial court had enough support, such an invincible cavalryman with impeccable equipment and combat power could take the initiative to attack the northwest border and look for opportunities. The reason was simple. Compared to Beimeng, Beiliang's territory was considered small. They could attack from all sides and maintain their advantage in numbers in a single battlefield. Even if the cavalrymen of Beiliang were on par with the border soldiers of Beimeng, or even slightly inferior, they could still defeat the border soldiers of Beimeng without any suspense. Then they would resupply and move to the next battlefield. The current predicament Beiliang was facing was that the imperial court had made up its mind to watch the fire burn across the river. Not only was there no way to retreat in the direction of western Shu, after the turmoil in Ji province and Yuan Tingshan became the strongest in Ji province, even the right side of Beiliang had become a hidden danger. It was true that Gu Jiantang could not meddle with the internal affairs of Beiliang, but it was easy for him to do something between Liao province and Beiliang. Great Ancestor Gu kept them in suspense and said with a playful smile, "It's not impossible, but it depends on whether Beiliang has the courage or not." Yan Wenwan smiled and said, "General Gu mentioned something a few days ago. He said that it's not difficult to defend the mouth of the bottle gourd with the current Yuzhou army. The Yuzhou infantrymen are enough. Then, the 30,000 cavalrymen can sweep through Ji province and gain more geographical advantage for Beiliang. When the war between Liangzhou and Yuzhou is in a stalemate, the 30,000 cavalrymen can take an arc and directly attack Longyao province. In this way, Beiliang will not be in a dead-end situation where they can only be beaten. But Ji province. Chapter 1272. At this point, Yan Wenwan purposely left it blank. He Jianghu and Qin Yunchui's gazes crossed each other, and then they both looked at Su Fengnian. Since the beginning of summer in the first year of Xiangfu, the current emperor had displayed a stance that puzzled everyone in court. Even if Yang Xinxing's troops had failed, even if Yan Jinchuan's cavalry had been completely annihilated, the emperor did not show too much anger. Although the position of commander-in-chief Lu Xingxiang was shaky in the wind and rain, this was not caused by the unfavorable battle situation. Instead, it was a bleak situation from the beginning, and now there were signs of it becoming more and more stable. After Yan Jinchuan died in battle, it could be said that he was extremely honored. He was posthumously given the title of Wuxia, and posthumously given the title of Jingzhong Marquis. His only son Yan Daiden immediately received an exceptional promotion. Yang Xinxing was trapped and lost the face of the court. However, it was said that a secret memorial was sent to the emperor, adding fuel to the fire for the Imperial College's Jean Lanting to impeach Grand Secretary Zhang Julu. It should have saved the lives of the Yang family, and it was not impossible for them to return to Jizhou in the future. Compared to the defeated Guangling Road, the emperor of the Zhao family obviously placed more attention on the calm Jizhou. He personally approved many memorials. Outsiders did not know the inside story, but Beiliang's side, especially Yan Wenwan and the other military leaders, knew very well that the emperor's wariness towards Chao Changqing and the rest of the West Chu rebels who were causing trouble under his nose was far less than the Beiliang cavalry. Su Fengnian did not give a direct answer but said softly, Qin Zhibao cut off the west line of Liang, which should be the first step of Yuan Binshi's plan. The second step is to let Jizhou approach step by step. In the past, Yang Xinxing did not have the ability to do so. Even if he wanted to keep Beiliang in check, his tens of thousands of old soldiers in Jinan were unable to do so. The imperial court simply let him go to Guangling Road and hit a wall. Because of this, the local forces in Jizhou were cut off. Taking this opportunity, the imperial court needs a trustworthy new person to fill the gap. Not only must he be able to convince the public, he must also have the courage to challenge Beiliang. That mad dog Yuan's meteoric rise should be a business deal between Yuan Binshi and Gu Jiantang. Yuan Binshi can further restrain Beiliang, and Gu Jiantang can be more assured in the periphery of the east line. Everyone is happy. Great ancestor Gu sneered, this mad dog really wants to be the new master of Jizhou. How can it be so easy to sit on the seat of the new master of Jizhou? Beiliang really can't stop him. Compared to Western Shu, Jizhou is even more of a pushover. The first thing Gu Jiantang will do is to be beaten into a sieve by Beimang's iron cavalry. Even if Yuan Tingshan is the son-in-law of the Gu family, can he really be compared to his own son? Chu Lushan laughed and said, wealth comes from danger. Small people are always like this when they go to the gambling table. If they want to gamble, they will gamble big. They are never afraid of losing their family fortune. Speaking of which, when we fought with my foster father from the north to the south, we also put ourselves in the same situation. Although Yuan Tingshan isn't likable, he's definitely very interesting. Su Fengnian suddenly turned to look at Yan Wenwan and asked, General Yan, if you only have infantry in Yuzhou, how many Beimang soldiers can you stop? Yan Wenwan said without hesitation, one gourd outside Tuma Pass can hold 150 to 60,000 Beimang soldiers. With Honglu General Chao Xiaojiao and Hong Xinjia as partners, they can both attack and defend at the border. Within Yuzhou there is also the Hu leader Huang Fuqiu. 300,000. It is not a problem for the Yuzhou infantry to stop 300,000 Beimang soldiers. However, there is a time limit to this. However, this time limit is enough for the 30,000 light cavalry to provide reinforcements or attack in an emergency. Su Fengnian laughed and said, all right then. These 30,000 light cavalry will enter Jizhou from today onwards. General Qin Yunxiao's eyes lit up and asked, are we not going to inform the imperial court? Su Fengnian replied with a question, our Beiliang is only sending 2,000 or 3,000 cavalry to Jizhou to train. Do we need to inform them? That would be treating His Majesty as an outsider. Moreover, after going to Jizhou, the imperial court will know one day. Isn't that the same as informing them? At most, we will just have to submit another document to the Ministry of War. Su Weisheng, who was sitting beside Su Fengnian, laughed softly and said, it is clear that our Beiliang is reasonable. Qin Yunxiao suppressed his laughter. He Zhong, who was also in a good mood, could not help but laugh out loud. Your Highness, the difference between 3,000 and 30,000 seems a bit big. He Zhong suddenly waved his hand and said, 3,000 and 30,000 are only 20,000. It is not 30,000 and 300,000. Whoever wants to argue about this can argue about it. Moreover, that Minister Liu of the Ministry of War is our Highness's elder by marriage. Regardless of whether it is on the side of family or on the side of reason, Tangshi Sword Immortal should be helped. Su Fengyan rubbed his face and asked, in the past this cavalry was made up of scattered generals and captains. If they go to Jizhou, who will lead them? Do any of you have a suitable candidate? As the general of Bailiang's 160,000 infantry, Yan Wenwan was not in a position to interrupt. After all, this was a family matter of the cavalry. Yuan Zuozong could speak, Chu Lushan could speak, and even some of the infantry generals could speak freely. However, this famous general from the spring and autumn period was too prominent, so he should be silent. However, Yan Wenwan still spoke bluntly, I have two candidates for the position of commander and deputy commander. The commander must be more astute in the use of troops than in the proper way, while the deputy commander must be relatively prudent, more proper than astute. This will allow the two of them to complement each other and prevent the cavalry from being too lame. The vice-general can be my subordinate, Zhong Tianheng. As for the general, your highness will have to use different people. Su Fengyan smiled and said, Old general, please speak. Yan Wenwan glanced at Chu Lushan and said, then I will have to borrow someone from Protector General Chu. Chu Lushan stared and said, no. Even if you beat me to death, I will not lend him to you. That kid is an important person in the Protectorate and is also my right-hand man. In the future, I will have to rely on this kid. Su Fengyan could not help but be puzzled. Who was this extraordinary person that Lu Qiuer and Yan Wenwan liked? Yan Wenwan snorted coldly. It is not me who wants to borrow someone from you. It is His Highness who wants to borrow someone from you. Su Weisheng said indifferently, Yu Wandao is indeed qualified to lead this cavalry. Su Fengyan suddenly understood. Chu Lushan's expression was as if dozens of pounds of meat had been cut off in an instant. He sighed. Su Fengyan smiled and said, then it is settled. Let us go take a look at the topographic map of Ji province and discuss how to move these 30,000 people. The group of people walked to the front of a few tables. Someone had already brought over two maps. One was the geographical map of the entire Ji province, and the other was the topographic map of Jishi. In the northern Liang military there were countless of such maps. When Su Fengyan sent someone to invite Yu Wandao over, he stood in front of the table and looked around. Suddenly he said in a low voice, from today onwards, we in Bailiang will do what we are supposed to do. If the imperial court and Ji province dare to interfere, then we will cut off their hands and feet. In the future, if there is a conflict with any forces outside Bailiang, there is no need to inform the Mount Qingliang Wang estate. Do it first, and after it is done the Wang estate will help clean up the mess. Yan Wenwan, Qin Yunshui, and the other old generals all let out a long sigh at the same time. He could finally vent the resentment that he had held in for nearly 20 years in an open and above-board manner. Chapter 1273. Although the weather was cold, there was no snow. If one did not personally go to the frontier fortress, it would be difficult to understand the feeling of stars hanging over the vast plains. Su Fengyan accompanied Su Weisheng out of the Huayang Pass and a few miles outside the Huayang Pass. He was accompanied only by Chu Lushan. The old General Yan Wenwan and the new Yu Wandao of the Dragon Gate had already rushed to Yuzhou to take charge of military affairs. The latter gave Su Fengyan a report before he left, specifically describing the analysis of the battle situation in Guangling Road, focusing on Kojiangwai's series of raids from one point to the other. Large-scale cavalry battles in the wilderness had always been a scene that could only be seen on the frontier battlefield. In the hinterland of the Central Plains, large and small cities were scattered like stars in the sky and blocked by rivers, making it extremely difficult for cavalry to perform. To be precise, it was extremely difficult for cavalry to fight a battle in one go. It was not difficult to fight one or several exciting battles, but to fight to the end, abandoning the infantry and using the cavalry to the greatest extent, it was a test of the ability of the commander. Chu Lushan used the faint starlight to read the report carefully along the way, admiring it so much that he could not put it down. When Su Fengyan and Su Weisheng stopped at a small broken ground, Chu Lushan carefully put away the priceless rice paper, looked at the sky and sighed softly. Lu Xingxiang's proudest work in his life was that snowy night in Luzhou, helping Gu Jiantang take down the entire Dongyue without shedding a drop of blood. As for me, I was fortunate enough to not fail my mission when thousands of cavalry marched into Shu. In the past 10 years, these two battles have been deduced countless times by the old scholars who teach the art of war in Xianxia Academy and Imperial College. But in my opinion, this unruly Ko Jianghu in West Chu's new imperial court is much better than me and that assistant minister Lu. No wonder Yu Luandao, a proud and arrogant son of a powerful family, is willing to praise another son of the same age. Su Weisheng reached out his hand to ask Chu Lushan for the stack of rice paper, put it on his knee and casually pulled out a page, saying flatly, Ko Jianghu is recognized as a generalist in Xianxia Academy, but in the eyes of some scholars he is somewhat miscellaneous and not a master. I've played a few games with him. Su Fengyin could not help but interrupt. Second sister, can this kid beat you in a game of chess? Su Weisheng raised his head and stared blankly at Su Fengyin. Su Fengyin smiled embarrassedly and quickly shut his mouth. Chu Lushan caught a glimpse of this scene. In today's world, there were very few people who could make the young king of Bailiang admit defeat, and he could not help but laugh. In the end, Su Fengyin was afraid of the strong and picked on the weak. He glared fiercely at the gloating Chu Lushan, and the Protector General could only resentfully withdraw his smile. It must be known that a person who could make him admit defeat was equally difficult to find in the two imperial courts. Su Weisheng continued, most of the people I have played against are national chess players. Among them, Ko Jianghu is undoubtedly the weakest. However, this person's thoughts are the most unconstrained, and there is no set pattern to the game. He can play frighteningly strong moves, but he can also play stupid moves that do not make any sense, and he can also shamelessly play all the way to the end. These are not surprising. What is truly impressive about Ko Jianghu is that he has the least desire to win. This kind of opponent is very difficult to deal with on the battlefield. Prince of Guangling Zhao Yi has clearly suffered enough. On the eastern front of West Chu, Ko Jianghu, with inferior military strength, within 20 years, consecutively captured Huangyan Pass, including Daijai's and 6 other dangerous cities. They obtained the cities but did not defend them, giving up a temporary struggle for territory and striving to obtain an overwhelming military superiority over the enemy on a single battlefield. They nibbled away the reinforcements bit by bit, making large movements and long-distance raids. This kind of seemingly unreasonable military strategy is indeed worthy for us, Beimeng, who is at a disadvantage compared to Bailiang, to learn from. Probably because he was tired of standing, Chu Lushan sat down on the grass next to Su Weisheng's wheelchair. Unexpectedly, the height of his head was still about the same as Su Weisheng's. It could be seen that this head of Bailiang's officials, Lu Qiuer's body was very large. After entering the winter, the withered grass was sparse, so he did not feel uncomfortable. He laughed and said, after the restoration of the country, West Chu's situation is quite similar to our Bailiang's. We have almost become fellow sufferers who sympathize with each other. Under the joint suppression of the 2 southern armies and several vassal kings, Chu Lushan is really like a snail in its shell. If Cao Changqing personally went into action, forcing Yang Xinxing to be unable to use his strength, Yan Jinchuan's death in battle could be considered reasonable. But right now, West Chu only sent 2 young generals into action, and it has already caused the Zhao imperial court to be in a terrible fix. Zhao Yi had no choice but to bring out the spring snow building's auspicious general. Presumably, the battle in Guangling will not be as short as 3 months or as long as half a year as predicted by the elders of the Liang Ministry of War, and it will not even be as long as we Bailiang predicted at that time. By the time the last wisp of smoke dissipates, I am afraid it will take at least 2 years. Su Fengyin laughed coldly and said, the Zhao family son of heaven used the New Year's auspicious talisman. His original intention was to create a new atmosphere. A new atmosphere is indeed a new atmosphere, but it is not the least bit joyous. Suppressing Bailiang and indulging Guangling, these were all created by him. I don't know if he has any regrets. Other than handing over the dragon robe and dragon throne to Crown Prince Zhao Zhuan, there is also this big mess. Chapter 1274. Su Weisheng shook his head and said in a low voice, the Zhao family is good at fishing in troubled waters in the middle of the game and making the final decision at the end of the game. Losing the first move, the Zhao family, compared to the remote Liang in the past, has a bigger family and a bigger business, so they can afford to lose more. The only difference is that in the past, the imperial court had our Su family as their vanguard. Moreover, no matter how anxious the previous emperor was on the surface, he still trusted our father and the Su family's armored cavalry. If not for the current emperor's insistence on nailing the Su family to the northwest border, would Cao Changqing and the remaining elders of West Chu dare to start a rebellion and seek their own death? If the Beiliang frontier army could send out 50,000 men to quell the rebellion, how could Yang Xinxing and Yan Jinchuan lose their integrity in their later years? Chu Lushan said darkly, "There's nothing we can do about it. The Zhao family's emperor is determined to be the enemy of the world. The feudal princes who split the territory, the new civil officials who gradually gathered together, and the military generals who set up independent territories, in his eyes, none of them are good people. He wants to help his son solve this problem before he dies. The chessboard is too small to accommodate so many big chess pieces. If he really did succeed, the crown prince Zhao Zhuan could really be a carefree emperor who doesn't attach importance to martial arts and focuses on civil affairs. Gu Jiantang has Chen Zhibao holding him back. Without Zhang Julu, the civil officials have no leader. When the time comes, they would be too busy trying to figure out the emperor's heart. How could they care about governing the country and pacifying the world? Besides, at that time, the world would be at peace, the military generals would have retired to their fields, so it would be even less of a chance for the civil officials to fish for merit. Other than currying favor with the emperor, the civil officials after Yonghui really have nothing to do. Don't say that old man Yuan Binshi's calculations are very smooth. Su Fengyin waved his hand and said, "There's no point in talking about this. Right now, Dongzhua's specific deployment of troops and generals, other than the direction of Liuzhou, there are no detailed intelligence reports. Wuxia, how long do you think Liuzhou can hold off Lu Gui's army? After that, how many Beimang border troops can be implicated and thrown into the pocket of Liuzhou?" With a smile on his face, Chu Lushan said, "With Little Prince's 30,000 Longxiang army helping to defend Lu province, they would not be able to defeat Lu Gui's hundreds of thousands of disorganized troops even if they were to fight for 100 years. In the eyes of future generations, no matter how we fought in the early stages of this unprecedented war with Beimang, there was no better or worse strategy. It all depended on who could accumulate advantages in the divided battlefields. From the current situation, Dongzhou clearly did not put too much thought into Liuzhou. He invited the most prestigious and also the youngest of the 13 great generals, border commander Lu Gui, to that side because he did not wish for Lu Gui to take advantage of the situation to rise up in the central plains. At the very least, he did not want Lu Gui to rise up too quickly and too fiercely. What I am most worried about is that Dongzhuo will attack Yuzhou in a spurt of energy, attacking the Yuzhou defense line to the death without regard for losses. In the meantime, he will place his most elite troops, the Tuoba and Hong Jingyan, on the northern front of Liangzhou to tie down the main force of our cavalry." Su Weisheng nodded and said, "If we attack Yuzhou in the short term, it will be the most muddle-headed method Beimang can use. However, in the long term, it will be the best method to preserve Beimang's national strength. After all, Beiliang is not the central plains, which has a great depth. Even if Yuzhou has a few cities that can be defended, and there are many fortresses and military cities south of the mouth of the gourd, the saying that the mouth of the gourd alone can swallow up 160,000 soldiers is not an exaggeration. However, as long as Beimang has the courage to do so, they will only have to send out 100,000 soldiers to cripple Yuzhou. Next, they will have to rely on Liangzhou's main force to reinforce Yuzhou. Once this situation develops, whether or not Liuzhou is defended will no longer affect the overall situation. This is also the reason why Yan Wenwan insisted that Yu Luandao lead 30,000 light cavalry to Jizhou. He was determined to use Yuzhou to win more time and space for all of Beiliang. However, this is an action that has no choice. In the end, they will lose more than they lose. The Liang imperial court is happy to see this, but Beiliang cannot afford it." Su Weisheng folded his hands on the paper on his knees and looked into the distance. Bodyguard Chu insisted on having Liuzhou enter a stalemate, attracting the attention of both the north and south imperial courts of Beimang. He hoped that Beimang's border army would send troops to Liuzhou, but he was also worried that Dongzhuo would focus on attacking Yuzhou. Over the past decade or so, Father has poured a lot of effort into Yuzhou and spent a lot of money on the soldiers. 7 years ago, during the raid led by the Dragon Waste province, he purposely stopped the border army of Liangzhou from reinforcing Yuzhou. He watched as the 30,000 soldiers of Yuzhou lost their cities and fortresses one after another and sacrificed their lives for the northern barbarians. He wanted to make Beimang fear Yuzhou's border army, and hoped that one day, Yuzhou would not become their fatal weakness. Chu Lushan said in a low voice, "Merciful people don't command troops." Chu Lushan suddenly exhaled a mouthful of turbid air. That old woman has been purging Beimang's Jianghu forces for many years. Now she can finally be put to use. On the border, those experts are keeping a close eye on the big and small passes. As long as they see someone quietly crossing the border, they will kill him on the spot regardless of his identity. Many of our men of sacrifice spies who have been lurking for many years can hardly pass on important military intelligence. This time, the Chess and Sword Music School and the Princess Grave have all been mobilized to seal off the news from the border and cooperate with Dongzhuo's border army. This move is really ruthless. Fu Shui Room has suffered heavy losses after being traced back to Beimang. Many provinces have been uprooted after many years of operations. Chu Lushan, who was squatting on the ground, rubbed his cheeks. That's not all. Not long ago, Beimang deliberately let a spy return. He had 16 heads of his colleagues from Fu Shui Room in his luggage. When the spy saw me, he cried and said that if it wasn't for the fact that he hoped Fu Shui Room could take back these heads, he would rather die than return to Beiyang. After the spy put down his luggage, he borrowed a cold knife and committed suicide that night. He didn't say his last words, he didn't write his will, he didn't leave anything behind. Chu Lushan said in a muffled voice, "Our new cold knife hasn't even started killing the northern barbarians, but it was used as a suicide by one of our own. If I continue to hold in this resentment, my lungs will explode from anger." Su Fengyin didn't say anything. His hands were clasped in the large sleeves of his purple gold embroidered robe. After winter, the continuous battle in Guangling Road had come to an end. It was Beiyang's turn to be engulfed in smoke. There was no snow this winter. No one knew when it would snow. However, the cold knives at the waists of the 300,000 border soldiers could be unsheathed at any time. Chapter 1275. More than 8,000 valiant Chang cavalry went from the border of Gusai Prefecture to between Qingcang and Linyao. Just as Chu Lushan had expected, the light-armored Chang cavalry were used by Lu Gui to cut off the connection between the two towns. The Chang people were once a thorn in the side of the overlords of the Central Plains. The Dafeng dynasty had been harassed by the Chang people for a full 200 years. Every Chang person rode sheep to shoot birds and rats when they were young, and when they were slightly older they rode horses to shoot foxes and rabbits. They were basically born to be elite soldiers on horseback. The light cavalry of the various countries in the Central Plains had gradually stepped onto the stage. To a large extent, it was because the Chang cavalry had forced them to do so. The Chang cavalry was also one of the teachers of the Central Plains. Before and after Su Shao took over Beiyang, the Chang people had withered day by day. This was especially so for the Su family, who often used large numbers of Chang cavalry to train their troops. This was undoubtedly a tragedy for the Chang people. As a result, the Chang people were natural allies of Beimang. This time, when they invaded the Central Plains, the various leaders of the Chang tribes all made peace with each other and made an oath. Under the lead of Beimang, they even formed an alliance with other tribes that had been suppressed by the Su family. Only then did they gather close to 9,000 cavalry and 20,000 war horses. Under the banner of the Chang cavalry, they started to take revenge on the Su family of Beiyang. This Chang cavalry that was originally impoverished along the endless border, under the great support of the northern Mang and southern dynasty, were finally able to realize their dream of several hundred years of being fully equipped with armor. Unlike ordinary cavalry, the Chang cavalry's cavalry blades were the arm blades that had already been withdrawn from the battlefield. The war blades were bound together with the arm armor, so unless the entire arm was chopped off, the blades would never leave their hands. Apart from the arm saber, the Chang cavalry also had a traditional short saber known as the piao. It was attached to the outside of the thigh like a farmer harvesting rice in autumn. They used it to cut off the ears and heads of their enemies as spoils of war. More than 8,000 Chang generals galloped towards the south. The leader of the group, a burly man, bent down and stroked his ancestral clapper. His eyes were filled with hatred. Years ago, when that Su family of the Central Plains slaughtered his way into the northwest, all the local adults who disobeyed his orders were killed on the spot. Even the children, who were no taller than a horse's back, could not escape the disaster. Although they were not executed, both their thumbs were cut off by the Su family's cavalry. This meant that even if these children were lucky enough to survive, they would not be able to hold their weapons firmly and swing their swords at the Beiyang frontier army. This middle-aged Madame Wan's surname was Jean. At the time when his tribe was trampled by the Su family's horses, he was lucky enough to follow a group of young men to hunt and store food for the winter. When they returned to the tribe, other than the corpses on the ground, there were only the children crying with their hands dripping with blood. Beside the children's feet were the corpses of their parents. He swore that he would personally use this clapper to cut off the thumbs of everyone in Beiyang with the surname Su. As long as they had the surname Su, even if they were infants, he would not let a single one go. This was especially true of that butcher's son, the person who had been usurped as the new Prince of Liang. Not only would he cut off that young man's thumbs, but he would also cut off Su Fengyan's head, limbs and fingers one by one. This Madame One slowly straightened his back and looked towards the vast expanse of land to the south with a vicious smile on his face. He had heard that there was a butcher's son named Su Longxiang in Liuzhou. He was very famous among the nobles of the southern dynasties. Last year he had beaten up a few military towns in Gusai Prefecture. He did not expect to capture this person with less than 9,000 cavalry. However, before he worked with General Lu Gui to completely flatten Liuzhou, he had to drink the fresh blood of the Beiliang people. He had to make that young man, who had butcher's dirty blood flowing through his veins, suffer so much that he wished he was dead. The young man's Longxiang army did not have more than 30,000 cavalry. Did he want to defend all of Liuzhou? In the eyes of the generals, this was just an old show between brothers in the Central Plains. It was clear that the young king was afraid of his younger brother's great achievements on the border, so he purposely left Su Longxiang and all of the young man's direct descendants to die. In the winter the water dried up and the grass turned yellow. The war horses were not as strong as in the autumn and summer. In the eyes of the Central Plains, especially the Jiangnan people, it was the most unsuitable time for war. However, to the Liangmang people who had been on the border for a long time and were familiar with the harsh cold, as long as they were determined to fight, they could fight to the death on any battlefield, even in the damned snowy weather. On the contrary, the Chang generals Jin Cheng liked fighting in the depths of winter the most. The scene of using a long spear to stab into the enemy's chest and then dragging out a bloody path in the snow was more enjoyable than drinking good wine. The Chang cavalry's galloping raids had always been known to be as fast as lightning. While they were praised, it also revealed the Chang cavalry's weakness, which was that they could only do one-off business on the battlefield. Although they could advance and retreat freely, before they obtained an absolute advantage and began a chase, it was very difficult to expand their battle results. They did not have infantry formations and did not have heavy cavalry holding the line. This time the Beimeng emissary was extremely disrespectful to the Chang cavalry. Even though he had a request, he was still arrogant. Before discussing the price, he even said to their face that they were just decorations and that if they dared to ask for an exorbitant price, they should be careful not to lose their heads. He also threatened that if they did not act according to General Lu Gui's orders, they might as well not return to the border. When the time came, the Beimeng army would directly view the Chang cavalry as an enemy. Jin Qing fiercely ground his teeth. If not for the fact that he wanted to take revenge on the Su family, who the hell would want to deal with these pig-headed officials? Jin Qing looked into the distance and suddenly felt an inexplicable sense of unease. The 8,000 Chang cavalry heading down south to cut off Qingtsang and Linyao, leaving Qingtsang City, the capital of Liuzhou, isolated and without help. In his eyes, this was indeed an excellent strategy that caught the enemy off guard, and the Chang cavalry did not have to take any risks. However, on the way down south, he still had 20 or so roaming cavalry scouts at the front to scout the path. Every cavalry had to be 10 li away from the Chang cavalry army. No matter if they came into contact with the enemy or not, they had to turn back and let the second cavalry take their place. Logically speaking, at this time, one of the roaming cavalry should have returned to the front of the army. Furthermore, for this trip to Liuzhou, Beimeng had specially given him a scout. It was an old fellow who exuded a dangerous aura. There was a sword at his waist and his aura was long and steady. He did not look like a soldier at all. Even if he used his butt to think, he knew that this was a hidden Jianghu master. It could be seen that Beimeng had indeed invested a lot in this attack on Beiliang. They had even brought out the Jianghu forces that they had trained for 20 years. Jin Qing was not a madman who would be blinded by revenge. He knew the severity of the situation. Otherwise, he would not have become one of the generals. He had come to assist Lu Gui's army in taking advantage of the situation. What he was most afraid of was directly clashing with the main force of the Dragon Elephant cavalry. However, the Beimeng emissary, who was dressed like a nobleman of the Central Plains, had promised that apart from a small portion of the 30,000 Longxiang army, most of them would be pinned down at Qingtsang City and the area to the east of Qingtsang City. Otherwise, Beiliang would have treated Liuzhou as a chess piece and sacrificed the Longxiang army, an elite cavalry force that had experienced hundreds of battles. However, Jin Qing, who was not a madman, began to worry that he would encounter a madman king of Beiliang who would do anything to stabilize his throne, as well as a general of the Longxiang army who had lost his mind after becoming a chess piece. After waiting for a while, there was still no sign of any cavalry scouts. Frowning, Jin Qing raised his arm and waved it back and forth slightly, indicating for the cavalry behind him to slow down. About half an hour later, the figure of a scout finally appeared in the field of vision of the Chang cavalry. As the warhorse galloped over, Jianghu and the other Kiliarchs were shocked to discover that there were numerous crossbow bolts stuck in the back of the scout. Before the heavily injured scout breathed his last, he did his best to speak of the precious military intelligence he had obtained by sacrificing the lives of more than 20 Chang cavalry. 8 li ahead, there were 3,000 enemy dragon elephant light cavalry. Chapter 1276. Major Jianghu was both happy and worried. He was happy that the other side only had 3,000 cavalry and wasn't the main force of the dragon elephant army. He was worried that his army was here to fish in troubled waters and not to fight to the death with the dragon elephant army that was said to be invincible at the border. There were 2 paths in front of the Chang cavalry. They could continue south and use their advantage in numbers to take down the 3,000 cavalry. They could grit their teeth and complete their mission of cutting off Lu province. However, the Chang cavalry would suffer heavy casualties, and they would not be able to bargain with the Beimang after they had secured victory in Lu province. The second path was to avoid the brunt of the attack and not fight to the death with the 3,000 dragon elephant light cavalry. However, they would also not retreat and instead advance in a roundabout manner. In the end, there would be unavoidable battles. At most, they would just fight for a while. With the Chang cavalry's speed, which had been the fastest in the world for hundreds of years, they could fight or retreat. Jianghu thought for a bit, and then decisively chose the latter. Their Chang cavalry wasn't Northern Mang's million-strong army that could contend against the entire Liang dynasty. Compared to that pitiful Northern Liang that his uncle didn't dote on, the Chang clan was struggling at death's door. After Jianghu made his choice, 2 of the Kiliarchs revealed expressions of relief. One of the Kiliarchs, surnamed Ku, was extremely angry at Jianghu's cowardly behavior. He loudly reprimanded him from his horse and declared that he would lead his 1,600 Chang cavalry to fight to the death. Jianghu's face was gloomy. He patiently told this rash youth that although the dragon elephant light cavalry was inferior to the heavy cavalry, they were not an enemy that could be easily dealt with. If other than the 3,000 cavalry there was also the Longxiang army, then their 8,000 men would not be able to leave Lu province alive. However, the young Kiliarch who had seen all the male elders in his family being beheaded by the Su family when he was young did not listen at all. He insisted on fighting the enemy to the end and did not forget to mock and ridicule Jianghu, saying that he, as a Kiliarch, had embarrassed the men of the Chang tribe. Jianghu laughed coldly in his heart. He gently turned his horse and made way. Kui, if you want to die, I will not stop you. The Kiliarchs raised his arm and the 1,000 Chang cavalry behind him roared in unison, waving their arm-binding blades. When the youngster named Ku Jiao's mount passed by the Jincheng warhorse, his expression became a bit calmer, saying with a sneer, I am willing to use my clan's 1,600 cavalry as the vanguard. If Major General still wishes to obtain the first batch of military contributions in Liang Mang's great battle, I believe with Major General Great's astuteness, you should already understand what to do. Jianghu narrowed his eyes. He did not care about the sarcasm in this idiot's words and began to weigh the pros and cons. If Kui and his men were to use their lives to weaken the dragon elephant light cavalry, then if they won this battle, other than Kui, the losses of the Chang cavalry would not be too great. This deal could be done. The expressionless Jianghu watched as the 1,600 cavalry broke away from the main army and charged out. Seeing the cavalry whose faces were still full of childishness move further and further away, Jianghu suddenly had an untimely feeling. Had he gotten used to a peaceful life of wine and beautiful women? Was the hatred in his heart not as deep as he had imagined? Jianghu shook his head, trying to shake off these unnecessary thoughts. His gaze gradually turned cold and resolute. He turned to the eager Kiliarchs beside him and said, We will follow Kui, but we must keep a distance of 1 li. The 5 or 6 Kiliarchs all nodded excitedly, their eyes burning. Jianghu suddenly laughed. Brothers, don't forget those Qingqian on the grasslands. They are willing to pay a few hundred taels of silver for a cold blade. Ha, what a coincidence. There are more than 3,000 waiting for us to take. As for who can take more, it will depend on who can kill more Bailiang cavalry. I Jianghu will not break this rule just because I am a general's. Brothers, you can go kill without worry. 6 li away from the 1,600 Chang cavalry under Ku Qian. The 3,000 cavalry, all dressed in black armor and black horses, silently advanced forward at a uniform and powerful pace. An enormous black tiger was running around the periphery of the cavalry formation. The leader of the cavalry was a black-clothed youth who did not wear any armor. A cold blade rested on the horse's back in front of his chest, unsheathed. The general behind this half-horse was Scarface's man. He raised a metal spear at an angle, with a fresh head hanging from the spearhead. It was the wandering scout who had been mixed in with the Chang cavalry. He had a sword, and his swordsmanship was unknown. In any case, he had abandoned his horse and fled quite quickly. Unfortunately, no matter how fast he was, he could not outrun the spear that the black-clothed youth threw out. Before Scarface brushed past the corpse, he felt that he had nothing to do. After pulling out the spear from the corpse, he lightly cut off the head and stabbed it into the spear tip. Scarface was the Longxiang army's valiant general Wang Lingbao. Originally, he shouldn't have appeared here. Instead, he should have obediently stayed near Azure City with Li Mofan, who was also a deputy general. They could only suppress their impatient tempers and slowly wait for that rotten old man surnamed Lu to bring a bunch of northern Mang trash with him to show off his strength. However, the commander had somehow heard from some scoundrel that a group of 8,000 Chang cavalry had broken through the border and was rushing to their deaths. Wang Lingbao wanted to kill these Chang cavalry who were tired of living, but the governor-general had sent an urgent military order to the Liuzhou provincial governor's mansion, telling the Longxiang army not to move. Provincial Governor Yang Guangdou had even gone out of the city to scout the camp, smiling as he whispered some kind reminders into Li Mofan and Li Mofan's ears. Wang Lingbao naturally did not dare to disobey a military order. Let alone the new Prince Liang's order, even if it was just Chu Lushan's order, Wang Lingbao would not dare to move the troops on his own. However, since his commander wanted to kill people, even if the sky fell down, the commander would be there to support it. How could Wang Lingbao miss out on this rare opportunity? In order to intercept and kill this group of Chang cavalry heading south, the 10,000 Dragon Elephant Light Cavalry had no choice but to split into 3 groups, each of them searching for the enemy between Qingcang City and Linyao military town. As the 10,000 troops set out, Yang Guangdou and the young scholar called Qin Shiliang quickly blocked their path, seemingly wanting to dissuade them. In any case, Wang Lingbao hid behind the army and picked his ears, pretending not to hear or see anything. As for the fact that the Longxiang army had broken a taboo in the art of war, Wang Lingbao really did not think much of it. It was true that the Longxiang army did not care about the situation in Liuzhou, but if one were to say that the 3,000 Longxiang army would be at a disadvantage in front of 8,000 Chang cavalry, Wang Lingbao would be the first to cut off his own head and use it as a urinal. When Wang Lingbao saw the provincial governor, he was quite angry. If not for the fact that he could not defeat the commander, he would have definitely hit him. However, the scholar who seemed to be highly regarded by the prince did not have any obvious expression. Wang Lingbao actually knew that after returning to Qingcang City, the news of the Longxiang army violating military orders would definitely reach the Huayang Pass Protectorate manor. At that time, even if the commander of the Longxiang army took the blame as a deputy general, Wang Lingbao would not be able to bear the consequences. However, so what? More than 10 years later, the true Liangmong Great War had finally arrived. Motherf *Ker, even a pregnant woman would only need 10 months to give birth. He and Li Mofan, these rough men, had waited bitterly for more than 10 years. In this first battle, if he, Wang Lingbao, did not take the lead, he would be the first to let himself down. As for why the young commander in front of him was so determined to fight the Chang cavalry, Wang Lingbao could not be bothered to care. Wang Lingbao let out a long breath. With a flick of his wrist, he shook off the head that was in the way. Looking into the distance between the two sides was less than 2 li. He could already see that the enemy cavalry had begun to speed up. Wang Lingbao softly muttered, "Beiliang is guarded by us. Great General, rest assured." Su Longxiang slowly pulled out his Beiliang saber. Under the illumination of the sun, it flashed with a snow-white light. At the same time, the 3,000 Dragon Elephant Cavalry began to raise their spears. Chapter 1277. The two cavalry armies began to charge at each other without any fancy moves. The terrain was flat and wide, making it easy for cavalry to spread out. Since it was an excellent place for cavalry battles, it also meant that it was easy for people to die here, and the speed at which they died would be very fast. The Chang cavalry were the lightest of the lightest cavalry. On one hand, they were so poor that they could not be heavy at all. On the other hand, their arms were long like apes, and their strength was outstanding. This made almost every one of them a master archer on horseback. The young Chang Chiliarch Kui, who had a blood feud with the Beiliang Su family, finally stopped purposely suppressing the charging speed of the cavalry. With a wave of his hand, he covered the eyes of his horse with a black cloth, and the speed of his steed suddenly increased. If there were spectators looking from a horizontal line, they would definitely be stunned by the muscles of these warhorses as they ran. The habit of covering the eyes of the horses during a charge had never been popular in the Central Plains, but this was an old custom that had been passed down for hundreds of years on the grasslands. At the beginning, it was to ensure that the warhorses would not be afraid when facing the infantry of the Central Plains, and at the same time to deliberately startle the warhorses. Before the fierce collision between cavalry armies, the cavalry would whip the warhorses to make them explode with greater strength, using the warhorses' speed to drive the cavalry's charge forward. However, among the elite cavalry armies in the world, perhaps only the Beiliang cavalry disdained to use this kind of insignificant skill. This was attributed to the fact that every horse in Beiliang had turned from raw to mature, and the large horse farms had poured in countless efforts. Of course, there was also countless amounts of silver. In northern Liang, every time a familiar horse stepped onto a large-scale battlefield, there would be one or even several war horses that would die before it could do so. On the battlefield, only the roars of the 1,600 or so Chang cavalry could be heard. In comparison, the 3,000 Long Xiang army, who were also light cavalry, seemed especially strange at this time. One reason was that they were collectively silent before the battle, but more importantly, they were practically fugitives who used light cavalry as heavy cavalry. After the dragon elephant light cavalry raised their spears and charged, they charged straight at the enemy, even giving up on the lethality of a wave of light crossbows. The Beiliang cavalry was good at fighting and dared to fight to the death. The Central Plains had always been good at a combination of riding and walking when it came to war. The infantry was in the middle and the cavalry was on the two wings. The latter was not used to break through enemy lines head-on. Other than being limited by the natural factor of the cavalry bow being inferior to the infantry bow, especially the large crossbow, the main reason was that the cavalry's greatest advantage was its great mobility. In the long series of classic battles of the spring and autumn period, this indisputable pattern of war was displayed to the fullest extent. As long as it was a general who could be crowned as a famous general, even if it was an infantry commander, he would still be able to command a cavalry army of several thousand men in an orderly manner. This was probably the so-called chronic illness becomes a doctor. At that time, the large group of Li Yang's higher-level generals who had been influenced by the flames of war didn't know how to ride, or rather didn't know how to ride, so they were too embarrassed to greet their colleagues when they went out. However, this kind of combined riding and walking tactic, once they moved to a place where supplies were difficult, it was inevitable that they wouldn't be able to acclimatize. After the current emperor ascended the throne, he took the initiative to launch several great battles against Beimang, and he suffered enough. Many situations that seemed to be in a good situation at the beginning were ruined by some battles that occurred outside the main battlefield. Take Beimang's Tuoba Bodhisattva and Dong Zhuo, two generations of famous Beimang generals, for example. These two became famous by relying on their light cavalry, which could easily be as long as 1,000 li long-distance raids. In one breath, they circled around to the rear of Li Yang's army and directly smashed one or even several main supply lines. The famous generals of the Liang imperial court, especially the cavalry generals, were greatly vexed by this, but for some reason, there was never a genius general who was able to break away from the infantry and meet force with force against Beimang's cavalry. Even so, the signs of the cavalry having to be separated and assume independent responsibility, as well as a series of books on the art of war that were derived from it, still appeared. Lu Xingxiang, who had been recruited by Zhao Yi to go to the distant Guangling riverbank, and Su Gong, who had never had the chance to go on an expedition beyond the Great Wall, each produced a military book. Unfortunately, it was not passed down to the generations, but it was widely praised within the military. Su Xiao greatly admired that dragon general Su Gong, who came from the Gumusu family, and thought that this person should have been able to overshadow Lu Xingxiang, who led the charge in the southeast. However, that group of Liang's higher-ups all knew in their hearts that if at that time Chen Jibao and Chu Lushan were given the opportunity, then in Beimang, this brand-new battlefield, these two would undoubtedly become meritorious figures not inferior to the four great generals of the spring and autumn period. However, at that time, even if the new Son of Heaven, out of selfishness, was willing to give Chen Jibao the opportunity to display his skills, that large group of founding elders would not allow the Su family to have a successor. In close to 20 years of constant warfare with Beimang, the Beimang cavalry also developed a set of extremely powerful and mature tactics. For example, the Beimang cavalry lacked crossbows but had many bows. Unless it was an elite soldier with astonishing strength, it would be difficult for an ordinary cavalry bow to break through the armor from 80 paces away. When the two armies collided and charged, under Chen Jibao's influence, the Beimang cavalry was abnormal to the point where they directly abandoned the crossbows in the process of exchanging fire. Relying on their advantage in armor, they allowed the Mang cavalry to throw out their arrows and fire at them, while their own side only focused on charging forward. As a result, Chen Jibao once made a presumptuous statement that made the outside world feel unimaginable. Under the premise that the military strength was roughly equal or even slightly inferior, the Beimang cavalry could only survive 40 paces. After all, outsiders were unable to witness this scene with their own eyes, and all along they held a strong skeptical attitude. However, it was undeniable that in the entire Liang dynasty, perhaps only the Beimang frontier army had the precious experience of more than 10,000 pure cavalry fighting in pairs with cavalry. Don't look at how the Zhao imperial court acted like they didn't know anything about the northwest border. Every time the wind blew and the grass blew, the current golden weaving bureau Li Shifeng would patiently and quietly send secret memorials to the capital. And the contents of these memorials were bought by Guangling Prince Zhao Yi and Yanqi Prince Zhao Bing through who knew how many favors and connections, so that the various advisors could ponder over and over again. At the same time, the Liang imperial court was not waiting for death. They decided to treat Beimang and Beiliang as imaginary enemies, thinking about how to truly go against the iron hooves of those war horses. After all, the outstanding generals of the Central Plains who stood out from the smoke of war were not useless people. They were quite effective. The division of troops and weapon combinations of the infantry and the cooperation of the weapons could be said to be at the peak of perfection. In the imperial examinations of the spring of Yonghui, there were even similar questions that had a deep meaning. This led to many bold and unconstrained ideas in the answers. Although most of them were seen as the nonsense of a scholar, there was an argument that suddenly shone brightly after many years of silence. That was to use extremes to fight extremes. The examinee who failed in the imperial examinations at that time proposed to invest all of his financial and material resources to develop the deformed heavy cavalry and strive to cross the threshold of 10,000 people. Even if he had to sell everything, he had to develop one or several heavy cavalry units and place them in an important town not far from the border. At that time, his answer sheet was like a clay ox in the ocean in the Liang imperial court. However, at the same time, the Beimang palace began to crazily use money to build heavy cavalry units. It was not until many years later that the Liang imperial court realized that these were the two units of cavalry that Beimang named after the country's surname, the Yelu heavy cavalry and the Murong heavy cavalry. The number of people barely touched the threshold of 10,000. However, even the layman civil official knew that to raise these two units of heavy cavalry, it was the same as cutting off the country's flesh and blood to feed these two large gluttons. This was because the true cost of the heavy cavalry was not in the establishment of the structure but in the maintenance of the soldiers. The Liang imperial court, who was slow to realize this, was forced by public opinion from all levels of society, especially Gu Lu of the Ministry of War and the Eastern Border Army. Only then did they bite the bullet and follow behind Beimang to create the Duoyen cavalry and the Yanmen heavy cavalry. The former had less than 8,000 cavalry and the latter had less than 5,000. As for why the scholar who went to the capital to take the imperial examinations would mysteriously die in a nameless alley, who cared? However, if someone knew of this secret they would sigh. A little essay of less than 1,000 words written by a nameless Jiangnan scholar had actually affected the life and death of 2 million soldiers in the desert frontier fortress. The enemy was 80 paces away from us. The front line of battle spread out like a line. The surging tide of Chang cavalry skillfully knocked their bows and shot arrows. The violent jolting of the back of the horse during the fast charge, the armor of the enemy cavalry, and the lack of time to switch shots in a hurried battle were all important reasons why cavalry archery was only the icing on the cake. Beimang's proper border army spears were not bad. Not to mention Dongzhua's Dong family army, even the generals and personal troops who held the edict had reached the level of the elite border army of Liang. However, this Chang cavalry was much more shabby. It was not that Beimang was so stingy that he was not willing to take out tens of thousands of refined spears. However, even if he gave them to the Chang cavalry who had their own set of tactics, it would only be drawing legs on a snake and not sending charcoal in snowy weather. The training of war horses was already a headache, much less the training of cavalry in horse battle. The weight of the spear and saber was related to the strength of the cavalry's arms. How many battles and how many lives would be sacrificed before an optimal answer could be found? The precise area of the spear to stab the enemy cavalry, the optimal angle of the saber, the appropriate weight of the armor were all different from person to person and required great knowledge. Therefore, if the Chang cavalry suddenly changed their main weapons to the overly extravagant and unfamiliar spears, and thus slowed down the speed of the Chang cavalry, then once the Chang cavalry reached Liuzhou, they would either be lucky and not run into the Longxiang army, or they would just treat it as a happy trip. If they were unlucky, then Generals Jin Qing would not even need to think about it. He would just turn and run and try to sell those spears for some money to escape. Those spring and autumn survivors who left their homes and fled north brought along many secret and superb forging techniques to Beimang. However, Beimang lacked a large amount of iron, causing many of the craftsmen of the southern dynasty to become hard-working housewives who could not cook without rice. Qin Jibao once said, "The northern barbarians who lack spears and spears are just a group of foot soldiers on horseback, that's all." Chapter 1278. It could be said that the war saint of West Chu Yi Baikue had pushed the cruelty of large-scale warfare to a peak. Thus, Qin Jibao had divided the war into the shoulders of every junior captain. Not only did he remember the names of every captain under his command, he even knew their personality and leadership style, as well as their combined strength under normal circumstances and their potential in unexpected situations. In ancient times, military experts liked to describe the unpredictability of war as ever-changing. Qin Jibao had long memorized ever-changing in his heart. He is fully deserving of the title of the #1 strategist in the history of the Qin dynasty, far surpassing his predecessors and peers. Any Jiangnan scholar who had read a few military books and admired the elegant demeanor of the white-clothed war saint would be able to say this kind of overflowing praise that sounded common. But in reality, the person who said these words was Chao Qingyi, who was publicly recognized as invincible in chess. Liuzhou did not hear the cries of the horns or the war drums. Just like that, people died in a hurried battle. The 2 rounds of long-range shooting by the Chang cavalry were expected to achieve merit, but the magnitude of the merit surprised the Chang cavalry. When an arrow accurately nailed into the face of a dragon elephant-like cavalryman, this cavalryman's head was immediately pulled back by the powerful arrow, and then he fell off his horse and died. The ownerless warhorse continued to charge forward. Many of the Chang cavalry cheered. The arrowhead of a Chang arrow struck the breastplate of a dragon elephant-like cavalry soldier, creating a string of sparks, but it did not pierce through. However, this northern Liang border army soldier's luck was truly terrible. His warhorse was struck in the neck by another extremely powerful arrow through the gap in the armor. The horse neighed, tilted slightly and crashed into the ground. The light cavalryman who had rolled away quickly stood up. His arm that was holding the spear had been broken, but without his spear he quickly pulled out the cold saber at his waist. He faced the Chang cavalrymen who were only 20 steps away from him and began to run in a straight line. Kui felt a bone-deep sense of powerlessness. It wasn't just because the 2 rounds of arrow rain only brought less than 100 casualties to the dragon elephant-like cavalry, it was also because even though the enemy cavalry could clearly use their spears to deflect the incoming arrows, not a single one of them did such a thing that would damage the impact of the spear. Not a single one. The 2 armies suddenly charged out, and it was hard to tell whether the enemy was dead or alive. The young Kiliarka's recklessness had brought disaster to the 1,600 cavalry that he and his clan had painstakingly gathered over the past 20 years. Even if the Chang cavalry saw that the situation was not good, the front line facing them started to move to the left, hoping to use the speed of the Chang cavalry to reduce the losses on the battlefield. The vanguard of the Chang cavalry moved slightly to the left. However, the dragon elephant-like cavalry reacted in an instant, charging to the right as a whole. The thunderous hooves of the horses did not decrease in the slightest. The rapid changes on the battlefront were actually not much when it was divided between 2 enemy cavalry positions. The Longxiang army and the Chang cavalry were embedded in each other's formation. In the blink of an eye, more than 300 Chang cavalrymen were pierced through by spears. These Chang warriors were all dead before they could even get off the back of their horses. Among them, dozens of Chang cavalry corpses were lifted into the air by the dragon elephant iron spear. The line that symbolized life and death was filled with the blood of the Chang cavalry. There were some lucky Chang warriors who managed to dodge the spears of the first row of dragon elephant-like cavalry, but the spears behind them quickly pierced a hole in their bodies. Some of the luckier ones who managed to survive were instantly killed by the third row of dragon elephant-like cavalry, even if they managed to survive the second row of dragon elephant-like cavalry. One of the Chang cavalrymen had just had his shoulder pierced by the second dragon elephant-like cavalry. He swayed, and before he had time to rejoice, a third iron spear pierced through his neck. His corpse fell backwards, sliding a short distance on the horse's back before finally falling dead on the sand. The deputy general of the Longxiang army, Wang Lingbao, directly shot out 3 candied haws. Discharge. The dragon elephant-like cavalry easily pierced through the window like a heavy hammer. Scarface and Wang Lingbao lightly shook their wrists, sending the 3 Chang cavalrymen off the iron spear. They did not turn around to observe the battlefield, not even looking at the corpses on the ground. They continued to charge forward. They were not far from the second Chang cavalry. Behind Wang Lingbao, the ground was covered in Chang cavalry corpses and blood. Many of the Chang cavalry horses that had fallen off their horses slowly came to a stop after running for a short distance. The 300 injured Longxiang army cavalrymen raised their blades and stabbed the surviving Chang cavalrymen. Some of the Chang cavalrymen spoke in a language that the dragon elephant light cavalry did not understand. They were probably begging for mercy, but none of them showed any mercy. Ever since the general led the 100 cavalrymen out of Liaodong, the Su family cavalry did not have the habit of taking captives in. Apart from the 40 at the two ends of the 1600 Chang cavalrymen, the rest of the Chang cavalry were all killed by the 3000 dragon elephant light cavalry. The young Chiliarch who had charged into Flo province for the sake of revenge and for the sake of establishing himself also died after killing one person and assassinating two others. Chapter 1279. One side killed extremely cleanly and efficiently, while the other died without any hesitation. Kui's original intention was naturally not to use the 1,600 cavalry his tribe had painstakingly amassed over the past 20 years to pave the way for Jin Cheng's meteoric rise in the Beimang imperial court. This Chang warrior, who was used to enjoying victory on the grasslands near Beimang, remembered the blood feud from 20 years ago, but forgot what kind of existence the enemy he wanted to take revenge on was. Before leaving his home, which could be considered a foreign land, he had heard that the Dragon Elephant Cavalry had slaughtered their way through half of Gusai province last year. However, he had also heard from the mouths of many southern court people that this was only the carelessness of the defending generals of Gusai province. He had also heard that as long as Dong Zhuo or any of the other great generals moved out, not a single one of the Longxiang army that had penetrated deep into the heartland would be able to return. The Beimang border army would toss the severed heads one after another along the border between the two countries. Kui had come for revenge, but unfortunately his youngest son, who was still waiting for his father to return home, could only wait another 20 years before he could continue his revenge. For the Chang people, their nearly 100 years of exile was like walking from one foreign land to another. He lay in a pool of blood, the sunlight above his head blinding. Then he saw a shadow appear above his head. It was a dragon elephant light cavalry rider whose shoulders were one up and one down due to his injuries. Kui struggled on his deathbed trying to raise the blade tied to his arm. That officer seemed to have noticed Kui's futile resistance. He frowned and then chopped off this Chang youth's head. After thinking for a bit, he also chopped off the corpse's right hand. Then, like many of the dragon elephant light cavalry who could still fight, the officer cleaned up the battlefield, found a suitable warhorse, mounted it, and began to charge again. In many of the rich places in the Chinese plains, no matter who killed who, most of them were filled with scheming plots and schemes. Even when gangs fought each other to the death, there might also be the competition of the government's backers and the secret instigation of schemers. In the end, killing people was not fun and dying was not fun. However, at the border of Liangmang, it would be very easy for people to die. Moreover, it would be as fast as the speed of arrows and iron hooves. After killing the 1,600 suicidal Chang cavalrymen, under the leadership of Wang Lingbao and the two captains, the Dragon Elephant Light Cavalry's warhorses slowed down and sped up in a rhythmic manner. In this way, the warhorses could fully unleash the second wave of momentum to ensure an effective pursuit. This was the invisible difference between a famous general on the battlefield and a mediocre general. War, especially a local battle, naturally required 10,000 men to fight against 1,000 men. However, it also required generals like Wang Lingbao who were familiar with the rules of the battlefield. Without the former, the battle would be more difficult, but without the latter there would only be defeat. About half a li away, General Jin Cheng was completely dumbfounded. However, this middle-aged Chang cavalryman who was more experienced than Kui, did not hesitate at all. Without saying a word, he led the Chang cavalry in an arc and retreated. The reason why they did not stop and flee was because the Dragon Elephant Light Cavalry, whose fighting strength was negligible, did not allow them to waste even a little bit of their fighting strength. Wang Lingbao calculated the distance between the two sides and the warhorse's speed. He squeezed his horse's belly and wanted to go to Su Longxiang's side to tell him his thoughts. However, this young commander of the Longxiang army had already raised his arm and made a simple hand gesture that everyone in the Beiliang frontier army knew. Quickly stop him. Su Longxiang, who had not displayed much fighting strength in the previous charge, had only used his war blade to kill 3 Chang cavalrymen. He had only chopped off their heads. When Wang Lingbao saw the commander jump up high and abandon his horse, he began to run with his blade in tow. Wang Lingbao laughed, not knowing whether to laugh or cry. Our commander really makes one feel helpless. After Su Longxiang made that hand gesture, the dragon elephant cavalry that had been purposely maintaining an orderly formation finally changed. The more than 400 cavalrymen charged out of the army in an instant. These elite cavalrymen decisively followed the war god commander in their hearts to kill the remaining 7,000 Chang cavalrymen. The aristocratic families were particular about the fact that the country could be destroyed, but the legacy of the family name could not be destroyed. However, for an army, the backbone supported by countless martyrs could not be broken. The backbone of the Beiliang cavalry. It would rather be broken. As for whether or not the Beimang had the ability to break this backbone, they would have to kill each other. As Su Longxiang ran faster and faster, a giant black tiger rushed to his side. Then, the 400 cavalrymen behind the black-clothed youth and the 2,000 dragon elephant cavalry saw an extremely strange scene. Su Longxiang bent down without slowing down, his hands grabbing the two legs of the black tiger. His body spun, and just like that, he smashed the black tiger into the center of the Chang cavalrymen. After the giant black tiger crashed into the ground, it continued to roll. Dust was kicked up from the ground. Countless mud-like corpses and a large number of people were thrown off their horses. Scarface and Wang Lingbao's mouth could not help but twitch. Those fellows that were smashed would definitely be in a lot of pain. When the 400 fast riders at the front were about to catch up to the tail of the Chang cavalry, Wang Lingbao glanced at the large crater that was created by the black tiger's explosion. On the mashed-up corpses, large flowers of blood bloomed. Chapter 1280. The first year of Xianghu. Early winter. Near the city of Jianghu, a delicate and pretty girl in thin clothes and a young monk in a shabby kasaya were walking together. Stupid Nanbei, we're almost at Jianghu. Why am I getting more and more nervous? It's almost as nervous as the first time I peeked at the love letter that the vixen at the foot of the mountain wrote to my father. You're nervous when you're close to home. Anyway, Su Fengyan's home is half your home. A monk is pleading for you. Aren't you afraid that the Buddha living in the Western paradise will drown you with a sneeze? Master still has his wife. I don't see him being afraid of wind, rain, or thunder. Stupid Nanbei, we don't even have a copper coin to buy beautiful rouge and face powder this time. Will he think that I'm getting uglier and uglier? How can he? This is your promise. If it's not like this when the time comes, I'll beat you up. Amitba, stupid Nanbei, let me ask you a question. You Buddhists, stop. Lizi, your home is my home. What do you mean, you Buddhists? I was picked up by Master and brought up the mountain. It was Master's wife who helped me shave my hair. Master's wife said that I was crying at that time. Look, how old was I at that time? I already knew that I didn't want to be a monk. Okay. Just answer me directly. Why do Buddhists say that the heart is all prajna? Then, are those bodhisattvas' great wishes a kind of obsession? If so, how can there be hope to become a Buddha? Oh, Lizi, why don't I answer you after I become a Buddha and burn the Saraira? Is this how you used to preach to those big and small baldies? No wonder the old abbot always likes to owe copper coins. Mother asked me to urge him, but the old abbot always laughed bitterly as if he had eaten something bad. It must be that the old abbot dislikes your preaching. Stupid Nanbei, why are you crying? Can you be a little more promising? The old abbot has become a Buddha, not dead. Cry when you cry, laugh when you laugh, eat when you eat, sleep when you sleep, and recite when you recite. When the wooden fish rings, I am Buddha. This is what my master taught me. Come on, how stupid are you? You can't even comprehend Buddhism. If you become a Buddha, who will be willing to believe in Buddhism in the future? By the way, stupid Nanbei, speaking of the wooden fish, why haven't I seen my father let you knock it? My family doesn't have it either. That's true, but our stingy neighbor, Baldi Huineng, did hide a very precious wooden fish. I heard from my mother that it was carved from the Wutong tree of Shishu. If you hit it with all your might, you could hear it from dozens of miles away. Are you serious? Of course not. Once, Master's wife wanted to go down the mountain to buy a set of clothes that she liked for a long time. Coincidentally, Master didn't have any extra money, so he took me out to hide from Master's wife and secretly met with Abbot Huineng to drink. Abbot Huineng drank happily and sat on the ground holding the wooden fish for most of the night. At that time I stood outside the door to keep a lookout for them. I didn't feel that the wooden fish was very loud. Actually, Master's wife was thinking about the value of the wooden fish. Once, when Master's wife saw me washing clothes, she let it slip. She said that in the future she must bring the wooden fish home and then give it to you as a dowry. How impressive. My mother? No wonder every time my mother saw Baldi Huineng a few years ago, she would ask him how old he was. Alas, fortunately, my mother only wandered around the small town at the foot of the mountain and never went into the Jianghu. Otherwise, Which young master would be willing to pay attention to her? Anyway, master is watching over master's wife, and master's wife isn't willing to go into the Jianghu. Besides, master's wife always said that the women at the foot of the mountain are either tigresses that eat people without spitting out their bones or foxes that only have skin but not brains. Especially that great P city, the streets are full of shameless and indecent women. It has always been master's forbidden area. How can master's wife be at ease with master? Otherwise, master's wife wouldn't have followed master to the capital this time, right? Wu Nanbei, do you believe that I won't tell my mother? Ba. Master, no wonder you don't talk back every time master's wife scolds you. The more you say, the more mistakes you make. I kind of understand. Stupid Nanbei, what are you muttering about? On the road, the young girl puffed up her cheeks and clenched her fists as if she was knocking on the wooden fish. Dong dong dong, when the wooden fish sounds, I am Buddha. Yaya dong dong dong, the young monk secretly turned his head and snickered. On this day the sun was warm. As the center of Beimang's southern dynasty, Xijing City was originally called Good Son-in-Law City. It was once just a normal city. With the influx of scholars from the north, it gradually had deep and secluded courtyards in Jiangnan. It had thick black tiles and white walls in the style of respecting one's ancestors. It had the private library of an aristocratic family that cultivated and studied. It had the unfamiliar sounds of reading, elegant high hats and broad belts, beautiful women's long dresses that dragged on the ground, and all kinds of food that dazzled the locals. Good Son-in-Law City became more and more prosperous day by day until it became Beimang's auxiliary capital. With continuous expansion, there was a court where the local nobles and foreign scholars each occupied half of the country. There was a system of 3 provinces and 6 departments. There were many talents and it was beautiful. With the passage of more than 20 years, this city seemed to have grown from a thin little girl into a plump, beautiful woman. Then, on this imperial road that was slightly more deserted than usual, a group of people walked slowly. The leader was an old woman. The old woman's age was naturally not something that New Xijing City could compare with. The old woman with an old fox fur draped over her shoulders was followed by an old Confucian scholar. Further behind, there was a middle-aged swordsman with a sword and a burly man in his 50s walking side by side. The old woman suddenly chuckled softly and said, "I heard that our war god met that family of 3 at Mount Hui, but they didn't fight." The old man in the green shirt nodded. Chapter 1281. The old woman lamented, "Is there a fragrance outside the walls? Why are the 2 people I admire heading to Liang? One of them dared to charge to the foot of the imperial capital's walls alone and meet my gaze. The other one is a sect by himself. If I remember correctly, this sect with only one person is ranked higher than the princess's grave in your chess and sword music school, right? If they are willing to stay in Beimang? Forget it, let's not talk about it." The chess and sword music school had 4 masters at its peak. Although Huang Baozhu or the devil Luo Yang had betrayed Beimang, Hong Jingyan was already the leader of the Ruran cavalry. Sword Qi Jin and the ancestor of the bronze statue were also among the top masters in Beimang. Who in the world would dare to underestimate the chess and sword music school? The old man who looked like a shabby old scholar smiled. If that wasn't the case, wouldn't the Jianghu be a lot less fun? The old woman turned to look at the middle-aged man with a sword. "Huang Qing, do you have a chance of winning against that person?" She wasn't asking about his chances of winning, but whether he had a chance of winning. The person who was asked nodded. Although the answer wasn't a pleasant surprise, it wasn't to the extent of disappointing the old woman. Huang Qing's real name was Sun Xiaopu. The chess and sword music school's name was Sword Qi Jin, and he was also Hong Jingyan's master. Because of the Liang dynasty's ridicule of the Beimang sword forest's lack of manpower, some people even declared that no one in Beimang could talk about the way of the sword. Because of this, he changed his name to Huang Qing. The old woman who could make Sword Qi Jin her retainer was obvious. This aging female eagle had been flying in the sky above all the other eagles in the grassland for far too long. The 4 of them walked into the palace of Xijing. Then, under the careful guidance of the eunuch from the ceremony directorate, only Empress Murong and the prefect of peace entered a secluded attic. Inside the attic, there was a grayish-black hornless dragon vat made of an unknown material. The vat was less than half a person's height, but it was so huge that it occupied most of the attic's main hall. Empress Murong placed her hands on the cool rim of the round vat, squinting her eyes as she looked at the clear water in it. This vat was called Slumber. Only after she had usurped the throne did someone secretly enter the palace to report to her that there was a dragon hibernating at the bottom of the vat. At a glance, he couldn't tell if there was a flood dragon, but the scene in his line of sight was already strange enough. There was no wind or waves. The surface of the water was clearly still, but it was uneven everywhere. If one were to look carefully, one could vaguely see that there were many small carps of different colors floating in the water. Empress Murong raised her head and looked around. Other than the prefect of peace beside her, there were only 9 people in the room. Among them there was the immortal Nan Ming, who was second only to the state preceptor Yuan Qingshan endowed sect, the most secretive qi cultivator in Beimang, and the astrologer Yelu Guanzhu, whose ancestors had been predicting the future for the Beimang royal family. Even Huang Songpu, the former king of the southern courtyard in the southern dynasty, had not seen the 9 real hermits who had lived here for decades. As for the other dignitaries in the southern dynasty, they did not expect to see them. They probably did not know that there was such a strange attic in western capital, such an inexplicable vat, and so many strange people gathered here. Empress Murong asked softly, "Where is Zhao Dun, the prince of Liang, who said that he would not attend the court because he was unwell?" Immortal Nan Ming, who had a head full of white hair but a face as tender as a child, walked to Empress Murong's side with a thin purple bamboo pole. He extended the pole and gently drew a small circle at a spot 2 feet above the water surface. The 100-year-old elder immortal of Dao's sect, whose voice was no different from a child's, said crisply, "Judging from the position, Zhao Dun has indeed secretly patrolled the border as the spider web reported." Empress Murong's finger lightly tapped the edge of the vat and sneered, "He's only at the age of knowing his destiny. He's going to die in front of an old woman like me. How pitiful." The surroundings were silent. No one dared to answer. She asked again, "Other than the little thing representing Qin Jibao that suddenly grew a dragon claw, is there anything else worth mentioning?" Immortal Nan Ming used the purple bamboo pole to point at a spot a little further south than before. Zhang Julu's tail fell 4 feet into the vat and is about to sink to the bottom. The old woman laughed, "What a Liang dynasty's deer that committed suicide." At this moment, the place that the old immortal Nan Ming was pointing at should be Great Peace City. After immortal Qilin's ascension, the new sect master of Dao's sect was expressionless. He moved the pole and pointed at the northwest direction. "Su Fengyan is still around Huayang Pass." Suddenly, a small black carp less than 2 inches long jumped out of the water. Then it didn't fall back to its original position. Instead it shifted slightly to the west. Empress Murong frowned. "This is?" Immortal Nan Ming still used his childish voice to say unhurriedly, "It's Su Longxiang." Some martial artists who haven't entered the celestial phenomenon realm but are blessed with providence will be indistinct even if they occupy a spot in the vat, unless their qi leaks too much. It's even more so for those qi cultivators who are good at restraining their qi. But once they leak the secrets of heaven, it's hard for them to escape the net of justice. As for those who are close to earth immortals, their natal fish will even disturb the water in the vat. For example, Wudong sect master Li Yufu. Previously, this person caused the secrets of heaven to tremble, causing the vat's water to overflow. Anything else? Yes. Huang Longshi, Tantai Pingjing and Xia Feiyu. The 3 people who originally had the most vague clues have shown signs one after another. Then Chao Changqing? Since he became the scholarly sage, he naturally jumped out of the vat. Empress Murong thought for a moment and said to herself, "Could it be that Lu Gui's main force has already encountered the Longxiang army?" Immortal Nan Ming hesitated and shook his head. "No. Su Longxiang should have gone to the west of Azure City and encountered the Chang cavalry." The old woman's face was gloomy, but it soon relaxed. "Anyway, you have 2 sons." The imperial decree of peace guessed what Empress Murong was thinking and said calmly, "Since there's a flaw, we can let Huang Qing and Copper Man assassinate Su Longxiang. Such an opportunity will be hard to come by in the future." The old woman pressed her thumb on the edge of the vat and asked, "Can they make it in time?" The old scholar who was the imperial tutor of Beimang smiled and said, "Let them rush there as fast as possible. After that, it'll depend on their luck." The old woman smiled and said, "Then let's give it a try." The imperial decree of peace turned around and walked out of the room without hesitation to instruct Huang Qing. The old woman asked and answered her own question. If it succeeds, will there still be a war in Liuzhou after so many rounds of scheming? No. Chapter 1282. The Hall of Merit had the diligent room, which was different from the Imperial College. It was for the children of the Zhao family to study. Because the legitimate princes, other than the Crown Prince of the Eastern Palace, had to be conferred the title of Prince of the Eastern Palace, the diligent room was where the children of the Prince of the capital studied. A small number of descendants of officials who were conferred the title of Marquis were also allowed to enter this place, which was known as the Little Imperial Study. The diligent room had the two positions of junior tutor and junior tutor leading the study of politics. In addition, there were more than 20 teachers with high status who taught the Confucian classics and were personally appointed by the emperor to be the personal teacher of a certain prince or descendant. All of them were great writers of the dynasty. Occasionally, there would be a knowledgeable and highly respected De Huang who would enter to give a lecture. That group of dragon sons and grandsons, as well as the children of nobles and nobles, entered the diligent room at the age of rushing into the age. Every day they would study for 10 hours, day after day, year after year, all the way until they were married and conferred nobility. Regardless of whether it was winter or summer, they studied without stopping. This tradition had been unshakable for the past 20 years, from the previous emperor to the current emperor. Moreover, the rules of the diligent room were complex and extremely strict. The students who entered the room did not hold a fan in summer or add charcoal in winter. Regardless of their status, they had to bow to the teachers they met on the way. If they made a minor mistake, they would be punished with a bamboo punishment. If the current emperor wrote a couplet, "Stand with sincerity, learn the truth," and hung it on both sides. Other than the obscure Prince Zhao Kai, all of the children, including the Crown Prince Zhao Zhuan and the eldest Prince Zhao Wu, had spent a long time in the diligent room. If the position of junior tutor and junior tutor was said to be extraordinary and was expected to be conferred the title of marquis, then the teachers of the diligent room were worthy of being called the emperor's teacher. As for the two positions of junior tutor and junior tutor, they had always been empty. The two masters of the Song family had dominated the literary world for 30 years, but they still could not obtain this position. The previous junior tutor, Ma Rong, was the teacher of the previous emperor and the current emperor. He was not well known outside of the capital, but 4 years ago, when Ma Rong died of illness, the emperor and the empress personally went to the mourning hall of the Ma family to wear mourning clothes and keep vigil for a night. After Ma Rong's death, the positions of junior tutor and junior protector were empty. The nobles of Tai and city all thought that Qi Yanglong, who had just entered the capital, would temporarily assume the position of junior protector as a transitional position between the past and the future, and then become the official leader of the Liang dynasty in one fell swoop. However, a young man, who didn't even have the qualifications to assume the position of junior protector, abruptly barged into everyone's eyes and took the position of junior protector. This person had obtained the title of Jianghu at the tail end of the Yonghui era, but he was far less eye-catching than the top three. He had entered the Hanlin Academy and served as the Yellow Gatekeeper, but he was also lukewarm. It wasn't until he became the daily librarian of the Imperial Study in the Forbidden City that he received a few more glances from the important figures in the capital. However, that was all. Later on, this person was quietly promoted to the Minister of Meritorious Contributions Department, assisting the Minister of Personnel, Zhao Yuling, and his old superior, Prime Minister, Yin Maochen. He had successively participated in the imperial investigations and the local grade evaluations, two major events that were enough to determine the status of a fourth-rank official in Liang. This scholar, who could be considered a young man in the imperial court, was the one who truly made people speechless. In the imperial investigations that were held once every 3 years, this person still didn't reveal himself. However, in the South grade evaluations, this person was truly vicious and merciless, removing the official status of the governor of Pingzhou and 6 county governors in one fell swoop. It had only been 3 months and he was quickly transferred back to the capital. Otherwise, everyone in the court believed that this person would have died on the way to the south. So much so that when he became the diligent junior protector of the house, most people were numb to it. This person's path of promotion in the officialdom was too obscure, leaving no opportunity for people to give him a cold shoulder. In the end, people only knew that he had married a nameless princess a few years ago, and that she was a relative of the imperial family. In the imperial court, he had never participated in the struggle between factions, nor was he close to civil and military officials. He had never interacted with the eunuchs in the palace, not even once drinking wine with prostitutes. There were very few people who wanted to get to the bottom of things, and after they learned the truth they became more and more confused. This person was actually from Beiliang? Originally, it was already very surprising that the court had produced Jin San Lang, who had made a meteoric rise. Unexpectedly, this person's fame was even greater than that. It should be known that Jean Lanting's path of promotion could not be said to be glorious. It was said that first, he had relied on a recommendation letter from the old Prince Liang to enter the officialdom in the capital. Later, he had squeezed his way into the government through the elegant tricks of Lanting Shuxian. And as a fellow countryman of the Right Chancellor of the Imperial College, he had a clean background, and his path of promotion was open and clean. Even though he had married a princess, there had not been any rumors of a husband depending on his wife's status. And over the years he had held several positions in the capital. Whether it was the short-term Huangmen of the Hanlin Academy, the long-term Eastern Palace assistant lecturer, or the even shorter-term household assistant manager, he had always been a scholar who was quite close to the imperial family. It was likely that even if he were to shout on the streets that he was from Beiyang, no one would be willing to believe him. He was a scholar born in Beiyang, Qinhuang. Of course, nowadays, everyone in the capital should respectfully address him as Qin Xiaobao. Today in the diligent room, it was only 4:45 in the morning. The sky was still dusky, but the sound of reading could already be heard. The diligent room was divided into upper, middle, and lower rooms. Generally speaking, 6 to 9 years old were in the lower room, 10 to 15 years old were in the middle room, and 15 years old and above were in the upper room. Among them, the age of the women was calculated separately. Only when the men and women were married and had obtained the approval of the teachers could they withdraw from the school. Today was Confucian Day. In each of the 3 rooms, there was an elder reading the classics of the Confucian sage Xianxia. The degree of difficulty was naturally different. Outside the lower room of the diligent room stood a young scholar, wearing a purple robe and a mutton-fat jade belt bestowed by the emperor. He looked at the young children who were shaking their heads and doing their best to recite the classics. According to the rules set by the previous emperor, they were not allowed to wear a marten hat or fur coat in the room. The winter cold was bone-piercing. At this time, there was only a small copper stove placed under the teacher's desk. Most of the children who were born with the same surname as the country were no different from the children of poor families attending private schools. Most of their cheeks were frozen red, and their hands and feet were trembling. Taking advantage of the time when the teacher was reading, they hurriedly lowered their heads and blew a mouthful of hot air on their frozen fingers. Outside the room, in addition to this scholar who was dressed in special clothes and was quite unfamiliar to the eyes of ordinary people, there was also an old eunuch in the palace who was allowed to wear a red python robe. He stood outside carefully. The old eunuch was a little absent-minded and did not notice the arrival of the scholar. This was not surprising. He said that he had to keep an eye on the diligent room in case of accidents, but he had been standing here for more than 10 years. He had changed 7 or 8 robes. After more than 10 years, the affairs of the palace had always been strict, so how could there be any accidents? No matter how they acted outside after coming of age, the domineering children of the Zhao family all stood respectfully like him when they were studying, while they sat there obediently reading and reciting books. Even famous princes and princesses like Zhao Wu and Zhao Fengya had to tuck their tails between their legs after entering the diligent room and sitting down. The old eunuch looked outside the room and saw that a large red lantern had been hung on a branch in the courtyard after winter. He sighed quietly. He had heard that it was not peaceful outside. The remaining evildoers of the Guangling underworld had found a little girl surnamed Jianghu from somewhere and revived the country just like that. Many of the old fellows in the palace who had escaped from the West Chu imperial palace back then were now trembling in fear. When they were free, they did not even dare to drink a few mouthfuls of wine, saying that they were afraid that others would misunderstand them and think that they were drowning their sorrows in wine. It seemed that the barbarians in the West were also not peaceful. If the big barbarian Beimang wanted to make trouble, the small barbarian Beiliang also wanted to make trouble. He could be considered to have seen some storms in his life, but he just could not understand why these fellows did not want to live a peaceful life. Why did they have to make trouble blindly? Even that grand secretary was obsessed. Say you, Bai Yin, are not even as old as me, a eunuch, but you have already achieved such a high position. Why are you still not satisfied? Isn't this clearly seeking your own death? For no reason, the old eunuch thought of the flowers and plants in the courtyard and could not help but sigh. He thought to himself, Grand Secretary, human lives were not like those plants. If they were gone this winter, they would be there again next spring. At this time, a small and tiptoeing figure appeared outside the courtyard. He bent over and trotted in. As a result, when he saw the old eunuch who looked like a door god, he immediately looked as if his parents had died. The old eunuch only dared to laugh in his heart. This little fellow was the grandson of Commandery Prince Feng. Although he was not the eldest grandson of the eldest branch, he was still very doted on. However, this child had always been a punching bag in the lower branch. After all, the title of Commandery Prince Feng could frighten people outside the palace, but here no one took it seriously. In addition, the little fellow's body was weak and his temperament was soft. He was bullied all day long to the point that he did not dare to go home and complain to his elders. Even if he changed into a new pair of festive boots, they would be trampled into old ones by those naughty fellows. He looked at the child's sickly pale face and his pitiful appearance as he desperately covered his mouth to prevent himself from coughing. Although the old eunuch felt sorry for him, he, a eunuch, did not dare to violate the rules set by the previous emperor. If he was late once, he would be punished with bamboo. If he was late twice, he would be demoted. If he was late 3 times, he would be demoted again. Until he had no more rank to demote, he would be directly expelled from the diligent room. About 10 years ago, in the hands of the emperor, there was a lawless old prince who was the only legitimate grandson. He was directly demoted to a commoner. The old eunuch stopped the sweaty grandson of Commandery Prince Phone. With a cold face he said, "If I remember correctly, this is the 2nd time you have been late. You go in first. I will record it and send it to the imperial clan court." The child coughed and said intermittently, "Grandfather Lu, I really did not mean to be late. I have a cold." The old eunuch waved his hand. He was not willing to listen to the child's explanation. The royal family was not a big or small matter. This was the principle that the elders in the palace had taught the younger generation with countless bloody facts. He was only a servant. Why should he seek trouble for himself? Chapter 1283. It was at this moment that the old eunuch realized that there was a dazzling purple color beside him. He was shocked and even more shocked. After he came back to his senses and was about to bow, that person smiled and shook his head. The old eunuch, who was already the head eunuch of the palace, could only bow. The scholar in purple robes and jade belt walked to the old eunuch's side and grabbed the child's cold hand. He used a bit of force to pry open the child's fingers, only to discover that the child had coughed up blood. The scholar looked at the teary-eyed child and smiled gently. He rubbed the child's head and didn't say anything. He took the child's other hand and crossed the threshold of the lower room. The lecturer in the room was a famous literary figure from the Hanlin Academy. He glanced at the scholar's robes and then at the late child with a displeased expression. However, no matter how far this literary figure had distanced himself from the quarrels of officialdom, he was still somewhat afraid of the deep meaning of the purple robes. He stopped his recitation and reached out to grab a bamboo whip from the desk. With a straight face he said to the child, "Zhaoli, stretch out your hand." The child was about to step forward to accept his punishment when the scholar, who was no older than 30, said in a warm voice, "Lecturer Han, Zhaoli isn't being naughty. He just caught a cold and coughed up blood at such a young age." Yet he still insisted on entering the room to study. In the end, this is pardonable. The demotion from the imperial clan court is unavoidable, but can this bamboo punishment be waived? The old scholar snorted coldly, "Waive the bamboo punishment? What kind of scandal is this?" The scholar still smiled faintly and said, "The law is nothing more than human feelings." The old keeper cast a sidelong glance at this latecomer far above the rest junior and sneered, "Law, sentiment, and reason. Even Grand Chancellor Qi doesn't dare to say which of the 3 is more important. I wonder where did Lord Junior Guardian learn from?" Chen Wang, who was destined to become the first Lord Junior Guardian of the auspicious talisman era, said calmly, "This junior is self-taught and has no teacher." However, Chen Wang secretly believes that as long as there is a reason in the world, there is no distinction between big and small. The Confucian sage Zhang said it, the emperor said it, and even the common people said it. Official Han sneered, "Then I'll have to ask one more question. This is a reason that anyone can say, but who can prove it?" Chen Wang laughed softly and said, "It's nothing more than the 4 words of the conscience of heaven and earth. The heaven is fair, the earth is sorrowful, and the 2 do not interfere with each other. Man is not a plant, how can he not be heartless? Man is not a beast, how can he not have compassion?" Official Han's face was ashen as he tightly gripped the bamboo whip that he had used to beat countless descendants of the dragon clan. "Other people might respect you and be a bit afraid of you, Chen Wang, but I, Han Yuxing, would not take you, a Bailiang barbarian, seriously." The keeper was just about to explode in anger when he noticed a rare guest standing by the door, clad in a bright yellow robe. He quickly put down his bamboo whip and rose to bow. The other children also rose to their feet and saluted. "Greetings, Your Highness the Crown Prince." Zhao Zhuan laughed heartily and said, "I've disturbed Scholar Han's teachings. Forgive me, forgive me. There is one thing I must explain to Scholar Han. Zhao Li's nephew was on his way to the diligent room when I stopped him and inquired about his well-being for a long time, causing him to be delayed. I will personally inform the Imperial Clan Court. As for the bamboo punishment, if Scholar Han is afraid of breaking the rules, I will take the punishment for Zhao Li. Furthermore, this child is suffering from a severe cold. I have to ask Han Yuxing for a leave of absence. Studying is important, but the body is even more important. We study, we study. It doesn't matter if we die from studying. Studying is a good thing, the more the better. But if we die from studying, then it won't be pretty. Han Yuxing hurriedly smiled and said, Your Highness is too serious, too serious. With the crown prince pleading for leniency, Han Yuxing didn't dare to argue. He didn't feel that he was insulting the educated. He only felt that if Sage Zhang were alive he would do the same. Well, didn't Qin Xiaobao say before that the law is nothing more than human feelings? Zhao Zhuan rubbed Zhao Li's little head and said with a smile, Don't forget to ask your aunt for more sweets in the future. Then he let the old eunuch lead Zhao Li to find an imperial physician. He walked with Chen Wang on a dark path. After a moment of silence he joked, Chen Wang, it seems like you're not happy being the junior guardian. Chen Wang laughed and dismissed it. Zhao Zhuan stopped and looked at this guy. He asked seriously, It's said that a place's environment nurtures a place's people. You and our unyielding Jin Sanlang are both people of Bailiang. Why are you so different? Chen Wang hesitated and shook his head. He said self-deprecatingly, A place's environment also has its own differences. It seems that when Chen Wang, was practicing writing with firewood in the snow, the Right Chancellor was already thinking about how to develop high-quality rice paper. Zhao Zhuan said helplessly, With your personality, who would dare to let you be a local official? This who, obviously wasn't referring to him in general. It was referring to him, the crown prince who was supposed to be the regent of the country. Chen Wang smiled. If I were to be sent out, I'd at most be a county magistrate. If my official hat was bigger, it wouldn't be stable. Zhao Zhuan patted his shoulder. Do you think I'm stupid to be willing to use a sledgehammer to crack a nut? Chen Wang didn't reply. Zhao Zhuan suddenly asked, How do you evaluate the Grand Secretary and Chancellor Qi? Chen Wang didn't hold back and said straightforwardly, Zhang Julu's personality is strict and fearsome, like the scorching summer. Qi Yanglong's personality is gentle and cute, like the warm winter day. No matter if it's their ability to govern the country or their personal integrity, they are close to saints. It's my honor to be able to be an official with them. Chapter 1284. Zhao Zhuan sighed, It's a pity that a mountain cannot accommodate two tigers. Zhao Zhuan quickly smiled. The Minister of Revenue Wang Xiongui may go to Guangling as the administrator. Do you have any thoughts about this empty position? Yin Maochun will definitely look down on this small temple, so you don't have to worry about competing with him. The Minister of Appointments, Zhao Yuling, the Minister of Rights, Bai Guo, and the Minister of Revenue Wang Xiongui. Along with the Prime Minister Yin Maochun, they were all once the favorite students of Grand Secretary Zhang Julu and Tantanan. Now, only Wang Xiongui, who was publicly acknowledged as the least talented of the four scholars of Yonghui, was still persisting in supporting the facade. It sounded like even Wang Xiongui was going to leave, and to become the Guangling administrator, the biggest joke in the world. Even a blind person would understand the meaning of the imperial court's words. To kill a flying tiger, first cut off its wings. Chen Wang only shook his head and said nothing. Zhao Zhuan grunted and reflected, I was too hasty. Not only did I not help you, I even made you the target of public criticism. You're halfway through a journey of 100 li. Zhao Zhuan seemed to be talking to himself. Father is secretly patrolling the borders. It doesn't seem like a good idea to drag it out and delay the court session. Chen Wang, who had once been evaluated by Ma Rong as being prudent, did not say these two words. However, Zhao Zhuan looked at the dawn sky in the east, and his eyes were already burning. Regent. After Zhao Zhuan withdrew his gaze, he was once again the gentle and gentlemanly crown prince. He smiled, I heard that Mr. Yuan brought someone with him on his travels. Chen Wang asked, Can I tell you? Zhao Zhuan smiled helplessly, Why can't you and I talk about it? That person is the young phoenix of the Song family, Song Kelly, who is regarded as a fallen phoenix. Chen Wang asked doubtfully, Isn't Song Kelly a county magistrate in a county north of Guangling? This person is quite accomplished in suppressing the bandits. This is an impressive achievement, but it was deliberately suppressed by the higher-ups. Zhao Zhuan took a deep look at Qin Xiaobao. Then he smiled so widely that his eyes narrowed into a line. He pointed at the cautious guy with his finger and said, Keep pretending, keep pretending. Others might not be aware of Mr. Yuan's plan, but how could Chen Wang not grasp the crux of the matter? The Song family was destroyed in an instant. No matter how it appeared on the surface or what it did behind the scenes, most of the old foxes in the first 5 or 6 rows of the imperial court actually saw one thing clearly, but those who could see to choose were really not many. Grand Secretary Darren and Yin Maochun are definitely 2 of them. Next, even if there is only one person left, it will definitely be you, Chen Wang. Chen Wang didn't admit anything, but he didn't deny anything either. Zhao Zhuan sighed softly. Yin Maochun, Bai Guo, and Song Dongming were all Mr. Yuan's Minister of Concealment candidates. Even if the latter two were eliminated, Yin Maochun should have been the next Grand Secretary no matter how you look at it. Who would have thought that in the end, Song Kelly would quietly snatch the position from him? Chen Wang hesitated for a moment, then said, Mr. Yuan chose Song Kelly, but Grand Secretary Darren also made a choice. Zhao Zhuan was really confused about this matter. He asked curiously, it definitely wasn't Wang Xiongui nor was it Zhao Yuling. Then who could it be? Chen Wang said calmly, the Minister of Rights, Bai Guo. Zhao Zhuan instinctively laughed. He clearly didn't believe this absurd statement. Bai Guo? Impossible, impossible. Even though Bai Guo has an excellent reputation throughout the court, and everyone in the capital's officialdom is close to him, I also admire this wanton and extremely talented Minister of Rights. But if you say that after more than a decade of careful selection, Zhang Julu finally chose Bai Guo, who had given up once, to be the next master of Gu Hut, I wouldn't believe it even if you beat me to death. Chen Wang said calmly, I can't really beat you to death, Your Highness. Zhao Zhuan froze for a moment, then burst into laughter. In his mind, Chen Wang was a person like this old man who would never joke. These words really opened his eyes. However, after laughing, Zhao Zhuan began to think deeply. In order to pave the way for him, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that his father had spared no effort and calculated everything. Among them, the one that gave his father the most headache and pain was undoubtedly the Minister of Rights, Green Eyes. After Zhao Zhuan acknowledged Grand Secretary Darren's contributions, he had absolutely no good impression of Zhang Julu. Before His Highness the Crown Prince, the fourth Prince Zhao Zhuan was extremely fearful of this Grand Secretary, who had no selfish desires even though he had the power to overturn the court. If Zhang Julu was only a scholarly sage who devoted himself to learning, he would at most be made into a statue by the court and placed on an altar beside Sage Zhang. It was very simple. However, Zhang Julu was different. He valued merit over learning. He was a typical powerful minister. In the depths of Zhao Zhuan's heart, he felt that Zhang Julu was a lifeless living dead. He wanted nothing more than to stay away from him. If Zhang Julu really did as Chen Wang said and chose his former favorite student Bai Guo to be his tomb keeper after his death, then Zhao Zhuan would have to carefully weigh the pros and cons. Song Kelly, who needed many years to mature, could be easily dealt with in the future even if Zhao Zhuan didn't have any tricks up his sleeve. This was just thinking about the future. This was because every new emperor was never afraid of any new officials. They were only afraid of those old officials. It was obvious that Bai Guo could become a great threat close at hand. This was the immediate worry. Chen Wang didn't disturb the Crown Prince's thoughts. After waiting for a while, seeing that he still hadn't come back to his senses, he quietly turned around and left. After a long time, Zhao Zhuan opened his arms and stretched. He turned his head and didn't see Chen Wang. Zhao Zhuan left alone. The sky was also bright.